siang Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, Bapak Ibu anggota DPR. Sebentar lagi Bapak Gubernur Jawa Barat akan memasuki ruangan, dan supaya acara berjalan dengan lancar dan tidak terputus, mungkin kami mengundang Bapak Ibu untuk foto bersama dulu sebelum berlangsungnya acara. Silakan Bapak Ibu, mungkin kita berdiri di depan backdrop untuk foto bersama. Mohon protokol untuk diaturkan. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May peace be upon us all. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning in London. My name is Endar Ratnastuti, the head bureau of the Committee of Interparliamentary Cooperation. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the focus group discussion on promoting Indonesia's Green Growth Initiative, enhancing public access to information, and public participation in the parliamentary, legislative, and oversight roles. First, I would like to greet yang kami hormati Gubernur Jawa Barat, Dr. Honoris Causa Muhammad Ridwan Kamil. Terima kasih Kang Emil sudah berkenan memenuhi undangan Badan Kerja Antar Parlemen DPR RI. Yang terhormat pimpinan Bksap, Dr. Fadlizon, Pak Charles Honoris, Pak Puturudana, Pak Hafiz Thohir, dan tentunya Bapak Ibu anggota Panja Internasional Badan Kerjasama Antar Parlemen. Selamat datang di Bandung. And then I should also like to greet the speaker who will speak at the opening session, Ambassador Matthew Hedges from Westminster Foundation for Democracy Director for Asia and Americas, who will joining us all the way from London, UK. Good to see you again, Ambassador. And representing Padjadjaran University, Professor An Chandrawulan, the Dean of the Faculty of Law. In September, in collaboration with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, Bksap organized the focus group discussion in Bali to better understand the challenges and opportunities and to help reshape Indonesia's green growth plan post-COVID-19. Its discussion produced an action plan which includes promoting public participation and public access to information in Parliament's legislative, budget, and oversight roles concerning Indonesia's Green Growth Initiative, which is the main topic and of our today's FDG. I would also like to greet the speakers and experts who from different institutions who will speak today. Mr. Rafael Jimenez Aibar, Senior Advisor on Environmental Democracy from WFD, will also joining us from London, and Ibu Petrarca Kareci, Bapak Petrarca Kareci, Head of UN Pulse Lab for Indonesia, joining us from Jakarta, and then Dr. Nadia Astriani from Faculty of Law, Padjadjaran University, Pak Andika Putra Ditama from World Resources Institute, Mr. Iketut Putra Irawan, PhD, the Executive Director of the Institute of Peace and Democracy, joining us from Bali, Dr. Maret Priyanta from Faculty of Law, Padjadjaran University, and our moderators, Pak Agus Wijayanto from WFD, and Ibu Dr. Yulinda Andarani from Padjadjaran University. I would also like to greet everyone who are with us here this afternoon and those who join us virtually. Thank you for your participation. We are going to start our event today. To start with, we are going to hear the remark by Dr. Fadlizon, Chairperson of the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ibu Enda. Excellency Ambassador Matthew Hedge, Director for Asia and the Americas of the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, Honorable Dr. Honoris Causa Ridwan Kamil, Governor of the West Java Province, Honorable Mr. Charles Honoris, Vice Chair of the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation, Mr. Putu Supadmarudana, Mr. Hafiz Tohir, and honorable members of the committee, members of the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation, Professor Dr. An Chandrawulan, Dean of Law Faculty, Padjadjaran University. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon us all. Om Swastiastu, Sampurasun. On behalf of the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation, I would like to welcome all of you to this second round focus group discussion as a continuation of the previous round that we had in Bali on reshaping Indonesia's green economy agenda in the struggle of post-COVID-19 recovery, enhancing the roles of the Parliament through innovative citizen engagement. Our theme for today's discussion is promoting Indonesia's green growth initiatives, enhancing public access to information and public participation in the parliamentary, legislative, and oversight roles. So the theme signifies that among many international issues concerned by the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee, green growth, access to information, and public participation are considered to be important issues that require significant attention. Further, as the gate of international cooperation and diplomacy, the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee also aims to improve cooperation and partnership with international organizations on various issues of common concerns. This is also to ensure that Indonesia's national interests can be directed into the work of international organizations. To further support this, a standing committee on international organization was then formed. It is also part of the effort by the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee in assessing international organization contribution to Indonesian government's effort to realize green growth, especially after the COVID-19 pandemics, and how public would be able to participate as well as gain access to information related to the legislative and oversight role of the Parliament. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, on this good occasion, I would also like to thank the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, WFD, for the cooperation and partnership so far, particularly in planning and organizing this FGD. I hope the cooperation will continue in the future. The Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee is also open for possible cooperation with other organizations such as Unpad Lab, the World Resource Institute, and the Institute for Peace and Democracy, as well as with our friends from the Padjadjaran University in accordance with the law number 17, 2014. The law mandated that the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee to promote, develop, and to improve the friendship and cooperation between the Indonesian House of Representatives with the Parliament of other countries, both at bilateral and multilateral levels, including international organizations, which gather parliaments and or member parliaments from other countries. So moreover, with the diverse membership composition of the Committee for Interparliamentary Cooperation from various commissions within the House of Representatives, Cooperation is expected to bring more strategic values and benefit to parties involved. To conclude, I hope that participants in this FGD will receive useful insights and better understanding on public access to information and public participation in the House of Representatives' role of legislative, budget, and oversight against green growth, policy making, and green growth, policy making, and implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Fadlizon. Sebelum melanjutkan, kami ingin menyampaikan bahwa kami menyediakan simultaneous interpretation. Jadi apabila Bapak Ibu lebih nyaman mendengarkan bahasa Indonesia, kami sudah menyiapkan alatnya di meja. Kami persilahkan. And now I would like to invite our esteemed guest, Governor of Jawa Barat, Bapak Ridwan Kamil, to share his remark. Kami persilahkan, Pak.
Terima kasih, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sampurasun, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Honorable the head of Committee of Interparliamentary Cooperation, Pak Fadlizon, and all the members of Parliament that coming to Bandung, welcome to Bandung, West Java. Honorable Ambassador Mr. Matthew Hedges, Westminster Foundation for Democracy, Regional Director for Asia and America, and also the participant in this important panel. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you to Bandung, West Java. Bandung is the capital of West Java, and West Java is the biggest province in Indonesia in terms of populations. As a governor, I manage around 50 million people. Yeah, so it's like 1/5 of Indonesian populations. Within the 50 million, we know that everybody is competing for resources. They are competing for lands, for housing. They are competing for mobility. They are competing to find affordable education. They are competing for good healthcare services also. So in West Java also, we are home to 60% of industry in Indonesia. So you can imagine from 100% of total industry in Indonesia, 60% located in West Java. So any issue related to policy of economy must affect West Java first. And according to the law of economy, West Java usually perform better than national economy. But during the crisis, West Java also perform the worst compared to national economy. So is an extreme in the good time, or also extreme in the bad time. And I'm very happy to say for the last 5 years, West Java is always #1 in terms of investment destinations. Yeah. So during COVID pandemic, we post almost 70 trillion rupiah investment, bigger than our predictions. And also we are #1 in terms of export, a total of 17% of Indonesian export during COVID coming from West Java. So that's the basic data of our West Java. And also West Java is given the proximity to capital of Jakarta. So what happened in Jakarta must affect or get affected by West Java. Yeah. I really I'm very happy to have these conversations because 1 out of 4 priority of economic West Java is a green economy. Economy #1 is our infrastructure. Economy #2 is manufacturing. Economy #3 is tourism, and economy #4 is green economy. One thing that we are already have in West Java we are focusing to find new energy, replacing the coal-based energy. We have the waste to energy in Nambo, Bogor, using the municipal waste converted into RDF to replace the coal for burning in cement factory, for example. We are in the process of bidding in Bandung Raya, Greater Metropolitan, to take over 4 area of waste into the electricity also. In Sukabumi, we are building the wind energy on the top of the hills, but pending the agreement with PLN for some reason. But the priority of green energy is already takes place. We are also building 3 locations to transform plastic into fuels. So will be the first in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia. We are partnering, happy to say, with the UK company called Plastic Energy. So any plastic we found, we will convert it by industrial scale into fuels. And all this effort, of course, will have impact to environment, and West Java hopefully in the future will becoming the province with no plastic waste, because we use it to become another economic value. Starting 2021, as a governor, we are making new policy to have the vehicle of government using electric cars. Starting with the governor, will buy the Hyundai electric car as a official car, and also motorbike using electric bike is part of saving the environment. And we already compare, Bapak Ibu, the cost of regular vehicle and the cost of electric vehicle. Electric vehicle costs only 1/5 of monthly cost. So saving the fuel or BBM. Also in the green strategy in West Java, we are making what we call the policy of green buildings. Green buildings. I used to be a city mayor of Bandung before I became governor. So we are have tools to check whether the building is contributing to harm the environment, because the massive use of air conditioning, for example, the massive use of material that creating a greenhouse effects, and so on and so on. We have 9 sectors in green building, and as a governor, I make it mandatory to 27 cities to apply the green building policy for building permit process or EMB. If they apply and pass the green building, they will get the discount of fee during the process of EMB. In the household also, this year we are having an agreement with ITB to produce new technology of electric stove, jadi kompor listrik. You can imagine it will replace millions of kompor gas stove that too much dependent on gas supply. But with electric stove, it will create also save money for ibu-ibu, for mak-mak, around 1/3 of the cost. So this is also the policy that we are doing in West Java. And 2 more points. West Java is very fertile, sangat subur. So after COVID, we found 4 economy survive the COVID, Bapak Ibu. Number 1 is food security related to food, fisheries, perikanan, pertanian, agriculture, and also cattle stock or peternakan. Second, surviving economy during COVID is logistic, because we need to transport anything during this pandemic. The third one, healthcare. Number 4 is telecommunication. 4 sectors during COVID growth in positive way, especially the food security. So West Java with fertile land, declare that after COVID we will go back to rural economy. Ya, I have a campaign in Indonesian language untuk anak milenial pasca COVID, kembalilah ke desa tapi rezeki kota dan bisnis mendunia, kira-kira begitu. Syaratnya adalah tinggal di desa tapi dengan digital skill. Itu sudah terbukti selama COVID, yang banyak mendapatkan keuntungan ekonomi adalah orang yang skill digital dan tinggal di desa jauh dari penyakit, Pak, karena menjauhi kerumunan. So the future of young generation, not in the city, we are promoting back to village, rural, but with digital skill. Therefore, I need the support from the Parlemen to have a free Wi-Fi to every villages all over Indonesia. Because during COVID, the issue of quota creating a massive problem for daring our online education. And last point, West Java also have a destiny for so many mountains. We have so many disasters. Every year we have around 2,000 or more disaster per year. So if you divide it 365 days, every day we have 2 to 4 disaster per day. So this is that's why following the United Nations, West Java last year approved the new blueprint. We call it West Java Resilience Province Master Plan. So this will include the education, budgeting in all levels. We try to copy the Japan model of coping with disaster, and this is part also on how we do the land use. Yeah, because West Java from the center to the north is flat land. So the 50 million population live mostly from the center to the north. But from the center of West Java to the south is very hilly, steep mountains. Maybe only 10% people live in the south of Jawa Barat or West Java, creating a different kind of disaster. Center to the north, mostly floods. Center to the south, mostly landslide. But all depend on hydrometeorological disaster. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's more or less the situation of West Java related to green initiative. So hopefully by the support of the Central Parliament, this local regional initiative of promoting sustainable economy, promoting green economy will become the model for the future. Because as we know, during COVID, one of the highlight is so many pregnant wife, Pak, ya, kehamilan naik, ya, karena orang Jawa Barat suka bikin anak, jadi populasinya sangat besar, dan kita tahu populasi itu adalah ibu dari segala masalah, karena mereka akan berebut resources segala rupa, termasuk udara, air, tanah yang menjadi diskusi hari ini. Nah, mudah-mudahan apa yang saya sampaikan bisa memberikan sedikit gambaran lah, ya, dari seluruh Indonesia, Jawa Barat dengan populasi 50 juta, kami benar-benar ingin tidak konvensional, ingin futuristik, tapi tentunya butuh dukungan lahir batin dari semuanya. Terima kasih, thank you very much. That's my speech for this session. Thank you, hatur nuhun. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Governor, Pak Ridwan Kamil, for your remark today, and thank you for elaborating the strengths of West Java in Green Agenda. And ladies and gentlemen, next I will invite WFD Director for Asia and Americas, Mr. Matthew Hedges, joining us from London to give his remark. The screen is yours, Mr. Ambassador.
Many thanks, Chair. Dr. Fadlizon MP, the Chair of the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee, Mr. Ridwan Kamil, the Governor of West Java Province, Mr. Charles Honoris MP, Deputy Chair for the International Organization Relations of the International Parliamentary Cooperation Committee, Professor Dr. Anand Chandrawalan, Dean of Faculty of Law at Padjadjaran University, and members of the committee and other guests, many thanks for this opportunity to talk to you this afternoon, even if it is from a cloudy London and not from Bandung itself. I hope that the events of yesterday means that in the near future, I will be able to visit and perhaps see some of those very interesting innovations that the Governor has talked to us about this afternoon. The Westminster Foundation for Democracy, or WFD, appreciates the continuous support and collaboration with the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee of the Indonesian House of Representatives for the past 4 years. WFD has been a regular partner of the committee in conducting international parliamentarian forums, such as the World Parliamentary Forum on SDGs and the Indonesian Pacific Parliamentary Partnership. And we also thank Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee of DPR for working with WFD in this endeavor to contribute to global climate action through environmental democracy. The Parliament and WFD are both of a mind that it is crucial to enhance Parliament's roles in ensuring government success in achieving national economic growth while also protecting the environment. WFD has witnessed strong commitments from the Parliament, particularly the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee, to play more significant roles in this endeavour. And the committee fully recognised the urgency that the Parliament take initiatives to promote a green growth agenda, which led to the committee agreeing to work with us, with WFD, to conduct a series of focus group discussions to explore ways to enhance the Parliament's roles in contributing to global climate action by, first, improving the legislation with environmental impact, then scrutinising government budget proposals against green growth principles, and finally, conducting oversight on the implementation of the National Green Economy Agenda to bring about sustainable economic growth. And I spoke at the first discussion, which took place in Bali on the 23rd and 24th of September of this year, which was aimed at better understanding the challenges and opportunities and at figuring out what roles the Parliament can take to help reshape Indonesia's green growth plan post-COVID-19. The Bali discussion resulted in an action plan consisting of A, promoting public participation and public access to information in the Parliament's legislative, budget and oversight roles. B, playing more active parliamentary diplomacy on climate action, either by hosting or participating in regional and global climate change forums, including COP26 in 2021. And C, developing Parliament's white paper on green economy and public participation. Now, to follow up, the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee and WFD, in collaboration with the university, organised this second discussion to explore in more depth public access to data and information and public participation on environmental policies and implementation, which is part of an effort to promote economic growth while still protecting the environment, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions with the target pledged under the NDCs. Now, these discussions are very relevant to our initiative within WFD on environmental democracy. And the pillars of environmental democracy draw on Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration and Article 6 of the UNFCCC, adopted in 1992. The fundamental concepts outlined in the Rio Declaration and the UN Framework Convention have since been embedded in other regional and international instruments, including the 1998 Aarhus Convention, the 2010 Bali Guidelines, and the 2018 Escazú Agreement, as well as in elements of the Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE, process under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC. Now, all of them define three critical rights that form the pillars of environmental democracy, namely transparency, the right to freely access information on the environment; participation, the right for citizens to participate meaningfully in environmental decision-making; and justice, access to justice to enforce environmental laws as well as redress or compensation for wrongdoing. Indonesia ranked 17th of 70 countries surveyed under the Environmental Democracy Index, launched by the World Resources Institute in 2015, using 75 legal indicators of UNEP's Bali guidelines. Indonesia performed very well for the transparency pillar, well for the public participation one, and fair for the justice pillar. Now, in spite of this comparative high score among developing countries, there remain wide gaps to fill in order to meet the public expectations. And all the legal frameworks and procedures in place, but these legal and procedural foundations have not been adequate to bring about meaningful and substantive public access to information and public participation, let alone access to justice in environmental policy making and implementation. Very recently, the Indonesian public view that Indonesia's practice of environmental democracy is sliding backwards has begun to take hold. The public have begun to doubt the political will of government and parliament to sustainable development. And this event today, initiated by the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee in collaboration with us and with the law faculty of Padjadjaran University, has the potential to show the Indonesian public that political will to tackle climate change ambitiously is alive and well. We at WFD are committed to working closely with the Parliament to improve the environmental democracy of Indonesia by supporting Parliament to critically evaluate the recent condition of public access to information, public participation, and access to justice concerning the environment. And we very much look forward to working with you through these sets of issues and beyond on this crucial agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthew Hedges, for the remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard from the Parliament, from the government, and from our partner institution. And now let's hear some views from our university partner institution, from Padjadjaran University. For this, I would like to invite the Dean of Faculty of Law, Professor Antar. Please, Bu.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, dan salam kebajikan. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Dr. Fadlizon, MP as Chair of the International Parliamentary Cooperation Committee, Matthew Hedges as Director for Asia and Americas of WFD, former UK Ambassador to Paraguay and Deputy Ambassador to Myanmar, Mr. Ridwan Kamil as the Governor of West Java, all the participants today, and all the participants from DPR, Faculty of Law University Padjadjaran in this room, and who join with via Zoom or YouTube streaming. It is such an honor for me to speak on behalf of the Rector Universitas Padjadjaran. Let me begin by giving you a warm welcome to the focus group discussion promoting Indonesia's green growth initiatives, enhancing public access to information and public participation in the parliamentary, legislative, and oversight roles. I would like to express my appreciation to the Interparliamentary Cooperation Committee, Bksap Dpr RI, and Westminster Foundation for Democracy, WFD, who generously make this FGD in collaboration with Universitas Padjadjaran. As we all know, the economic growth not only has brought prosperity to the people, but also caused various environmental challenges to the nation, making the country more vulnerable to the impact of climate change and population exposed to public health crisis. According to the Principle 10 of the 1992 Rio Declaration, environmental issues are best handled with the participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. This idea has spurred the international community to take progressive steps toward creating a space for the public in environmental governance, especially by entrenching the concept of public participation in various international environmental instruments. The 2010 Bali Guidelines is a recent example. The Bali Guidelines are aimed at helping national government improve their legislation and practices to implement Principle 10 of 1992 Rio Declaration to facilitate broad access to information, public participation, and access to justice in environmental matters. This FGD conducted to critically evaluate the recent situation of public access to information and public participation in the policy making and implementation of government of Indonesia's Green Growth Initiative and explore ways to improve them in DPR's legislative budget and oversight role to increase success of Indonesian green economy. With all of the competent panelists today, I hope this FGD will contribute to understand the situation concerning public access to information and public participation in green growth policy making and implementation in Indonesia, and to know the information on international practices on public participation and public access to information concerning green growth policies and the implementation. I hope the FGD will result in many great and great discussion so that it can contribute to a better Indonesia. On behalf of Rektor Universitas Padjadjaran, we are looking forward for any potential collaboration such as a research, studies, or internship. Particularly, Faculty of Law, we have the several potential and possible research collaboration. Once again, thank you so much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, Om Swastiastu, dan salam kebajikan. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Professor An Chandrawulan. And now, the last, but of course not the least, we are going to hear remarks from Mr. Charles Honoris, Vice Chairperson of Badan Kerja Antar Parlemen, who is also the Chair of Task Force of International Organization within Bksap. Floor is yours,
Thank you,
Charles.
Ibu Enda. Excellency Ambassador Matthew Hedges, Director for Asia and the Americas of the WFD, Honorable Bapak Ridwan Kamil, Governor of the West Java Province, Honorable Bapak Fadlizon, Chair of the Committee for the Interparliamentary Cooperation, my fellow Vice Chair of the Committee, Pak Hafiz, Pak Putu, Pak Mardani, Honorable Professor An Chandrawulan, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Sampurasun, good afternoon everyone. Thank you all for being able to be here today and to participate in this second round of focus group discussion under the umbrella theme of Our Way Forward in Promoting the Green Economy. As mentioned before, the green economy comes up as one of the highlighted issues dealt within the committee. This discussion is timely due to our needs to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The committee must monitor its developments since they are a growing concern for the international community as well. This also correlates with our work under the committee's working group, or Panja, on international organizations. When this working group was established early this year, we intend to explore the role of international organizations in advocating specific issues and assess where Indonesia can best fit to lead and play its role on the issues and within the international organizations. The working group is also designed to promote deeper engagement with international organizations for a range of international issues. The pandemic, then, has set the course for our further exploration. We have conducted several discussions, including one with the WTO, to gather more information and knowledge of what is really going on with the pandemic and how to deal with it. We believe that the discussion should not stop with the public health issue. We need to think ahead to where we can recover and how we should do the recovery process after the pandemic and its following crisis. A path towards green recovery is crucial to be explored. Distinguished guests, our discussion today is built upon that consciousness, the need that we need a pathway towards a green economy and recovery. There are some international principles that we need to pay attention to, in particular, Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development adopted during the UN Earth Summit in 1992. Principle 10 emphasized three key components in environmental issues. They are 1. Participation, 2. Access to information, and 3. Access to the judicial and administrative proceedings. The working group is aimed to explore these three key components when it comes to devising a green economy and green recovery policies. I have, both on virtual and physical presence, our fellow from the UN Pulse Lab, a joint data innovation facility of the UN and Indonesia, to elaborate us more on access to environmental data and information so that we can promote more data-driven policymaking in the actions and the World Resources Institute, which will present the current environmental situation and the state of public participation in the issues. We have also partners, the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, the Institute for Peace and Democracy, and Universitas Padjadjaran for a deeper discussion in these matters. Ladies and gentlemen, this FGD is also virtually conducted, and we have also several participants joining the discussion from the Open Government Partnership, which is an international organization working to promote transparency and openness, which also currently has a strong relationship with the Indonesian House of Representatives in the work of Open Parliament. Let us hope that this discussion will be fruitful and beneficial for the work of the working group and the committee in mainstreaming the green economy and recovery policies and promoting further engagement and collaboration with international organizations. Last but not least, I wish you all good health and to be able to stay safe in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Pak Charles. I think Bksap should congratulate ourselves because we're taking this issue, which hasn't been widely discussed in DPR, but Bksap has done some step ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, we have heard all the remarks for the opening session. Before we move to the next session, thank you once again for all the speakers for the remarks. We should be happy, of course, if everyone can join the whole session. However, we understand particularly for Bapak Gubernur yang tentunya mempunyai agenda yang padat. Sekali lagi terima kasih telah hadir di acara Bksap. Mari kita beri aplaus sekali lagi untuk semua pembicara di sesi ini. continue with our sessions. For the first session, we will discuss the transparency and openness of green economy policymaking and implementation. This discussion will be led by Pak Agus Wijayanto, and the speakers are Mr. Rafael Jimenez Aibar, Senior Advisor on Environmental Democracy, Pak Petrarca Kareci, Head of UN Pulse Lab for Indonesia, and Dr. Nadia Asriani from Faculty of Law, Padjadjaran University. Pak Agus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ibu Endah. May I invite Ibu Nadia, please? Okay, we can begin the first session of our focus group discussion. As mentioned several times, ladies and gentlemen, that this FGD is actually a follow-up of the previous FGD in Bali. And one of the recommendations from the previous FGD is that we will discuss further into topic related to the promotion or promoting public access to information and public participation in environmental related policies and implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, there are three questions that we would like to address, at least from this session. First question is, why do these pillars, which is public participation and public access to information, actually matters in informal democracy, in sustainable development? The second point that would like to raise also in this discussion is that what are actually the challenges and what are existing opportunities that we can utilize in order to promote the public access to information in environmental policy making and implementation. And the third question we would like to dig from this discussion is what strategies that we can work together actually, that we can identify, that we can explore to promote parliamentary roles in this topic. For this discussion, we will have three speakers. One is Rafael Jimenez Aibar, the Senior Advisor for Environmental Democracy from the Westminster Foundation, based in London. Rafa has been an expert with many years of experience in supporting parliamentary worldwide in advanced environmental governance through his work in Environmental Parliamentary Association, GLOBE. And the way he works is always been trying to connect between policymakers, think tanks like research institute and civil society organization, and definitely the government in the country where the program is running. The second speaker that I would like to invite in this session is Pak Petrarca Kareci, or Pak Petra. So he is the head of Pulse Lab Jakarta. Pak Honoris Causa also mentioned what actually Pulse Lab is. So it is a joint data innovation facility of the United Nations and the government of Indonesia, based at the Ministry of Development Planning, or Bappenas. Pak Petra has been sitting in very rich experience in international development organization as a senior level management. Pak Petra worked for the World Bank. Pak Petra also was one of the director level Indonesian national, which sit as a director level position in the Australian Development Agency, AUSAID. So he also worked a lot, with many projects, worth more than 500 millions in Indonesia, focusing on various issues. And the third speaker we'd like to invite to address this topic is Dr. Nadia Asriani. I want to mention your name correctly. Nadia is a lecturer in environmental law of Padjadjaran University and has a very strong interest in environment, even since she was a student. She was also a former activist of ICEL, the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. So she is actually the person that has been very familiar on this topic as well. To cut my introduction short, I would like to first invite Rafa to give the first presentation. I'm going to give you 12 minutes each, so that then we can save some, more enough for discussion. Rafa, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Agus. So I understand that you will be running my slides.
Yeah, we can do it from here, or if you would like to use share screen, that's also possible.
Oh, yeah, I would prefer if you can do it from there. So I will simply say next. So, well, thank you very much for having given me the opportunity to contribute to this session today, which I found really interesting so far, with just the opening remarks, learning about West Java and the leadership of the province, making progress with the green economy agenda already, and listening to Chairman Charles Hundreds as well, as he was explaining what the mission of the committee is, to the working group, to find a space for Indonesia to engage at the international level and lead among the Concept of Nations. I'm going to try to address some of these questions. I have to say that I have a few more, I prepared content for a little bit more than 12 minutes, so I'm going to try to go really fast. But please do cut me if I am going too far, but the best is at the end. So without further ado, so when my colleague, when Pak Agus invited me to talk about the importance of transparency and access to information for policy making for a green economy, I first thought, well, this is a very simple argument. We are having this conversation today because you are aware of the importance of the green economy agenda, and you are aware of it because you are well informed, because as politicians, you realize every day that the people that you represent care deeply about this. And the people that you represent care deeply about this because there is information out there about how important environmental protection is for the future of Indonesia, for their future. Then I remembered a survey by a British market research company called GlobeScan that came out in June about the perception of the seriousness of climate change in 27 major countries, including Indonesia. So I remember that Indonesia was there, so I wanted to check the exact percentage of people in Indonesia that has said that climate change was a very serious or a somewhat serious issue for Indonesia. You can see in this slide that the figure for Indonesia was 88% of people. So that looked great. So it seems that Indonesian people are well informed and they must be passing their concerns on to you as representatives, and this is why you are here today. So this is working well. But then I looked into the details of the survey, and it turned out that it had been conducted only online and only among samples of 1,000 adults in each country. So it contains a bias in terms of age, level of education, and access to information, and also a connectedness to the internet. And this bias can be quite important, I imagine, in a developing country. So I wanted to look a bit more deeply into this issue. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this took me to a Gallup World Risk Poll of 2019, which was the first global study of the experience of worry and risk of 154,000 adults in 142 countries. So on average, most people, at least 60% in every region of the world, said that climate change is a somewhat serious or a very serious threat to people in their country in the next 20 years. So Gallup looked into the factors that were shaping attitudes toward climate change. And indeed, age was a factor, gender was a factor, but the main factor was education in every country. So more than half of people with 16 or more years of education said that they thought that climate change was a very serious threat in the next 20 years, compared with nearly 1 in 3 of those with 0 to 8 years of education. So if we look more closely, then we see that the views on climate change vary widely across regions. For example, people in Southern Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean region were the most concerned. The US had the highest percentage of climate change skeptics among the high-income countries. I mean, 21% of people viewed climate change as not a threat at all. So here we can see the impact of disinformation of the fossil fuel lobbies. But interestingly, in China, people in China, which is the second largest emitters of CO2, they were less concerned about climate change than in the US. And that was primarily because nearly 30% of the people in China said that they did not know. So overall, more than 1 billion people, so 18% of the global adult population, they were unable or unwilling to express their views about the potential effect of climate change. And these people were concentrated mostly in 20 low and middle income countries. This includes several countries that are likely to be the most affected by the effect of climate change and extreme weather, such as the whole of Southeast Asia. So this made me understand that possibly some of you are more concerned about climate change and environmental degradation than the people that you represent. So this must make your job fighting for a green economy in Parliament much more difficult than for parliamentarians in Europe or in Latin America. So this means that for you, the need for transparency and access to information on environmental issues in Indonesia is even more important, because it is going to make your job a lot easier if your constituents and your party colleagues are well informed. Next slide, please. So as it has been mentioned several times, environmental democracy involves three mutually reinforcing rights. So the ability for people to freely access information on environmental quality and problems, to participate meaningfully in decision-making, and to seek enforcement of environmental laws or compensation for damages. So these three rights were recognized in Principle 10 of the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development of '92. Then, as also has been mentioned, there are some regional agreements that have taken on the spirit of the Rio Declaration and have tried to translate it into a regional framework. And in Europe, in the wider Europe, the UNESE Economic Region for Europe, which includes actually Central Asia and Russia, the Caucasus, there has been a treaty about this, the Aarhus Convention, that entered into force in the year 2000. And then in Latin America, there has recently also developed the Escazú Agreement. So there in my slide, then which one could be next? Perhaps it could be an ASEAN agreement on environmental democracy. And Indonesia could certainly play a role there, but I'll come back to that in a moment. So going back to the issue of the level of awareness. So if citizens are not aware of the threats that they face, they cannot play their part. They cannot ask for change, and they cannot help you strengthening with their voices your efforts from the Parliament to chart a sustainable development path for Indonesia. So does this mean that Indonesia has had a poor performance on environmental democracy? Next slide, please. Okay, so we have to take one step back. So in February 2010, a milestone was achieved in the field of environmental governance when the special session of UNEP Governing Council, which is the Global Ministerial Environment Forum, was gathered in Bali and adopted unanimously the guidelines for the development of national legislation on access to information, public participation in decision-making, and access to justice in environmental matters. So these guidelines seek to assist countries in filling gaps in their national legislation and in subnational legal norms as well, and regulations at the state level or district level, to ensure the consistency at all levels to facilitate this broad access to information, participation, and access to justice. These Bali guidelines, by the way, are voluntary. They are just meant to help. Then in 2015, two more important documents saw the light. There was an implementation guide for the Bali guidelines, and then there was also, as mentioned, the first world ranking of countries on the basis of their practice of environmental democracy, which was prepared by the World Resources Institute. This guide is also a practical tool, and it collects examples of legislation and action from countries in many regions and levels of development, demonstrating how to implement the Principle 10 ideas in a variety of contexts. So this guide will also provide practical ways to address difficulties that can arise during the drafting and implementing of legislation. So it could be an interesting references for policymakers, for legislators like yourselves. Next slide, please. So 5 years have passed in 2015 since the adoption of the guidelines. So the World Resources Institute prepared this index of countries that puts Indonesia number 17 in a rank of 70 countries on the basis of a number of indicators inspired by the Bali guidelines, the standard. And as has been mentioned, the score was not so bad, particularly on transparency. So Indonesia has also, as mentioned already, been a member of the Open Government Partnership since the year 2011. So it is currently implementing commitments on environmental accountability and health and education and open data, etc. So it seems that access to information is not a problem. So how come then that there are so many Indonesians that are so unconcerned by environmental and climate issues compared to other countries? This issue perhaps is whether the information is reaching them. Is climate and environment integrated in the national school curriculum, or is it on the news, on television? And what would this assessment of the World Resources Institute look like if it was made today? Next slide, please. The UK, next slide. Okay, yeah, thank you. The UK got a very good score as well in the Environmental Democracy Index. The UK, as I mentioned, is a party of the Regional Pan-European Agreement on Environmental Democracy, which is called the Aarhus Convention. And these norms are transposed into UK legislation through a set of regulations which provide a definition of what is environmental information. They also define the way in which the requests for information have to be submitted to public authorities and the manner in which the public authorities have to respond to these requests. The regulations also define that what is environmental information, and it includes, as part of this, cost benefits and other economic analysis and assumptions that are used by public authorities in the framework of the measures that they take. Next slide, please. So, in the UK, public authorities must provide this cost benefit analysis and other economic analysis and assumptions. But this could really be revolutionary if the analysis were done well. But normally these cost benefit analyses are useless because they don't help us see the path towards a green economy. And this is so because they normally do not reflect the economic losses of environmental degradation. So if you're going to vote on a piece of legislation to build an infrastructure project or to authorize a forestry or an agricultural concession, wouldn't you like to know if it is going to have a net positive or negative impact in the development of that community or in the national wealth? So classical economic cost-benefit analysis does not tell you that. So it doesn't tell you whether the wealth created is going to benefit the local community or perhaps some other people somewhere else. And it doesn't tell you anything about the net economic losses caused by impacting on the environment. So what was the economic cost in terms of public health costs of the fires in Sumatra, for instance? And does this figure make any sense next to the sum that is given every year to the Peatland Preservation Agency, to the BRG? So the people of Indonesia need access to environmental information, but you as legislators, you need it as well. So you cannot know what is sustainable and what is not sustainable, what is an acceptable trade-off and what is a bad trade-off if you don't have information about the economic impact of environmental decisions. So this is why when my colleague, Pak Agus, invited me to this workshop, I proposed to invite Badan Pusat Statistik, BPS, Statistik Indonesia, to speak. Because for the past few years, they have been working on implementing environmental economic accounting with the support of the World Bank. Unfortunately, they were not available today. But so please let me tell you a little bit about their work they are doing, because they are creating the data that you need to answer these complex questions as decision makers, and also the data that civil society needs in Indonesia to control whether the government is doing a good job building a sustainable path for Indonesia. Next slide, please. So understanding how natural resources are used and depleted and regenerated, and to understand the economic value of ecosystem services is of the greatest importance for national planning. The disruption of these basic ecosystem services affects water quality and quantity and climate, and that has direct impacts on energy and on food security. This disruption affects the real economy. As I was mentioning, the 2015 forest fires have been estimated to cost more than $16 billion in economic losses. Also, local communities and the poor and the vulnerable are hardest hit by environmental degradation. The graph in this slide shows the extent to which low-income communities rely on natural resources. So 75% of their wealth depends on natural resources, even if it is only 11% of the national GDP, if you measure it in a traditional way, on the graph on the left. So these accounts can be useful in tracking the impact of policies. For example, in 2016, the government in Indonesia announced that beginning 2017, it was going to relax its ban on mineral exports. So a combination of the accounts of minerals, land, and ecosystem services could be helpful to monitor how this change is affecting the environment and the economy. So the information from the accounts has also been used to determine environmental damages. For example, economic valuation was applied in a ruling against PT Kalista Alam for illegally burning peatland forest in Aceh. The company was held financially responsible for damaged ecosystems, and Bappenas is planning to use these accounts as the evaluation approach to assess environmental damages. So transparency in these cases is going to increase because the information is clear, is comparable, and is publicly available. Then land, forest, mineral, and water accounts, they can support the governance agenda, especially with regard to fiscal reform. And yes, so Indonesia has this information, and now the challenge is to use it. In fact, Indonesia is privileging having this information because not so many developing countries have it yet. So I believe that the scrutiny of the implementation of the Omnibus law is going to be a moment when access to this information is really going to make a difference. Of course, it is a very difficult process. So a few years ago, I was in Colombia in a technical workshop organized by the World Bank with the Colombian statistical offices. Colombia was also benefiting from support to do this work. And I asked them, so have you presented this data to the Parliament, then to the Environment Committee or to the Budget Committee? And they looked at me and they said, no, yeah, because this is really political. So I said, well, yes, and that is precisely where this information needs to reach them. So it is understandable that the World Bank was not comfortable talking to Colombian politicians about this data. And it is also understandable that the technicians in the statistical office, for them, it sounded quite risky. So perhaps you as decision makers, you need to take the initiative to talk to Badan Pusat Statistik to see what they are doing. Next slide, please. So I'm now coming to the end of the presentation. So we have seen that access to information about the economic trade-offs for environmental policy is going to be extremely important to exert oversight on the impact of the Omnibus law. And I hope that Badan Pusat Statistik, with the help of the WAVES program and other knowledge partners, will be close allies of the Parliament in this process. But there are other two major ways in which you can make a big difference to environmental democracy in Indonesia in the coming years. So I wonder if you have ever heard about Action for Climate Empowerment, ACE, in the context of the UNFCCC, the Climate Convention. So ACE is a term adopted by the Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it refers to Article 6 of the Convention original text of 92. So this focus on 6 priority areas: education, training, public awareness, public participation, public access to information, and international cooperation on these issues. So this sounds relevant for the Committee of Interparliamentary Cooperation, doesn't it? So what ACE does is that it calls on governments to develop and implement educational and public awareness programs to train and scientific, technical, managerial personnel, foster access to information, and promote public participation in addressing climate change. The main weakness of ACE is that it is entirely voluntary. So countries do what they want. Some do a lot and some do very little. The national determined contributions, for example, under the Paris Agreement, they do not need to include any ACE activities, for example. So when you look at the way in which this issue is framed under the convention, you get the impression that it's not taken very seriously. So that the potential to use ACE as a way of delivering progress in national climate commitments is not utilized. So as a party to the convention, Indonesia has been implementing ACE actions for years. The last framework for ACE was adopted in Doha in the year 2012, and it expires this year. So a new multi-annual framework for ACE is going to be adopted next year in Glasgow, at COP26 in the UK. So for the past months, there has been a consultation about what countries would like the new program to look like. And I have copied here the first page of the submission of the Indonesian government to the UNFCCC about the next ACE framework. Well, it is the first page, and it is also the last page, because it is only 1 page long. It does make some important points. And I will ask Pak Agus to share it with you. But there is certainly a lot that a country like Indonesia can do to promote the empowerment and the participation of people on climate policy beyond what the government is now proposing. So I would very much like to invite you as legislators to contact the ASE focal point at the ministry. And these people will be happy to talk to you because typically they have very little power and they have no resources. So they have a very difficult job to advance this ambitious program of work with no support. And you can definitely help them. So you could, yes? Yeah, I'm finishing. So, yeah, I would like to invite you to take contact with these people and see what the government could do and what you at the Parliament can have a role delivering this program in the next period. And talking about the potential role for Indonesia leading on these issues, I would certainly launch here the idea that Indonesia takes a particular responsibility from a position of good performance, as we have seen, in promoting the development of a regional agreement on environmental democracy like we have in Europe and like there is now in Latin America. It's to have a position of leadership, you don't need to be perfect. And by trying to do so, actually, you learn a lot. And this is a space that I believe is really waiting for Indonesia in the ASEAN region. So thank you for your attention now. Nice, shut up.
Thank you very much, Rafa. Yeah, I'm not going to summarize what he present, but some important point to take from his presentation is that, for me, it's quite interesting that 75% of Indonesian population, let's say, actually depends on the green or environmental aspect. Why? Because they are relying their livelihood on only the 11% of the GDP, which is very related to environment and environmental work. The other one, as also mentioned previously, that Bali guidelines, has been used actually by Indonesia. That makes Indonesia rank 17 in the Environmental Democracy Index of WRI. However, there are still quite public criticism on this public participation, on this access to data information as far as it's concerned to the environmental topic. So then we can discuss further on the discussion in the Q&A and discussion session. But I would like to invite the second person, the second presenter, Pak Petrarca Kareci. Pak Petra, time is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Okay, thank you very much. Is it okay if I share my screen?
Please do, Pak.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity and greetings to the respected participants of this focus group discussion. It's very much a pleasure for me to be able to participate in this focus group discussion. And maybe if I could start with just introducing to you Bksap Jakarta very quickly. That Bksap Jakarta was established in 2012 as a joint facility of the government of Indonesia with the United Nations. So with the United Nations, it's under the Global Pulse Initiative. And in the government of Indonesia, it's with the Ministry of Development Planning, or Bappenas. And the three functions that the lab undertakes is to drive exploratory research, facilitate partnerships between governments and other development agencies and private sector on the optimal use of data, and then also in identifying new data sources that can be used to support public policy, as well as the ethical use of data. Just quickly, this is the journey of Bksap Jakarta since 2013, where our focus was initially on analyzing social media, and where we've expanded to incorporate and combine data sets from conventional data as well as non-conventional data, so including satellite imagery, telco data, Facebook data or Twitter data, as well as conventional data collected by BPS, such as PODES and Susanas. Our structure in Bksap Jakarta, we have three teams: the data innovations team, which focuses in the solution space, a second team, which is social systems, focusing on the problem space, and a third unit that focuses in the identity space. So a lot of our work, we collaborate with different government agencies, with the private sector, as well as undertake public communication. And we produce prototypes, technical advice, advocacy inputs, and semi-embedded systems. In terms of the environmental initiatives that we've undertaken, one that was implemented a while ago, and at that time was used by the President's Office or Kantor Sekretariat Presiden, was called Haze Gazer. So it was looking at information generated from social media to be able to see the location and the spread of haze that was at that time occurring in Sumatra and also in Kalimantan. Another example is Vampire, where we combine data from weather, climate data, satellite data, as well as conventional data from BPS to be able to understand where there are vulnerabilities to the environment that will impact on food production. And this is actually being utilized and spread by the World Food Program as one of their major platforms. Another one is Cyclomon, used to monitor occurrences of cyclones and how this would impact on Indonesia as well as in the Pacific. So this was also utilized in places such as Fiji, Vanuatu, and Papua New Guinea. This last one is in Indonesian, but this is what we're currently working on, also in monitoring haze, but this is based on community. So community-based air quality management, and what you can actually access and look at it on pantauudara.org. But it looks at, it supports communities to be able to report on the quality of their air and also provides advice on what they need to do. So just covering a number of those examples is just to say that there's so many new data sources as in combination with traditional or existing data sources that could be used to support environmental democracy, and particularly around the aspect of both transparency and participation, and perhaps also with regard to justice. So I was looking at the references on environmental democracy, and I noted that it's based on the idea that land and natural resource decisions adequately and equitably address citizens' interests and sets the standards for how decisions should be made. And so because this is focusing on citizens' interests, these are voiced and human interests. And I thought, what about unvoiced interests such as soil, water, air, organisms, solar energy, everything else that's also part of an environment? And so I think, what we can say is that there's, in terms of both voiced interests and perhaps unvoiced interests or non-human interests, it's actually represented by the data and the process of analytics that can support a stronger environmental democracy. And that's why I feel a real emphasis is needed on improving the data and the analytics for our environmental data in Indonesia. A good example, when we talk about green economy and actually underlying green economy is, I would say, is green knowledge. What exists in our environment, and particularly for Indonesia, as we know, is one of the or is the most biodiverse nation in the world. This source of information is from the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. You can access it at gbif.org. And when you look at a global level, it looks like Indonesia is quite well covered. But as soon as when you zoom down and see what knowledge is generated from across Indonesia that is geotagged to the location, you can actually see that there's still a lot of areas that have not been researched. The knowledge assets of our environment, of our biodiversity, have actually not really been collected, and so I feel this also emphasizes that there is still a lot of potential and still a lot of need also to build the participation of communities, build participation of local governments, by also being engaged in the thinking and the development around our green economy. So this is a nice reference to see that actually, despite us saying that we are one of the knowing that we are the most biodiverse nation in the world, there is still a lot of space or still a lot of assets, knowledge assets that we can collect that actually supports also around environmental democracy, including how communities interact and manage their environments. So the question is Indonesia's current data ecosystem able to support the issues around transparency and around participation and perhaps around justice? And so what you might be interested is looking at the case of COVID-19. If you access this site, COVID-19 CubCot version 2, I've provided the link, but I'll just switch to the actual site. What we've done here is look at every province reporting on COVID-19. And for such a national issue, only a number of provinces are accurately reporting and consistently reporting on cases of COVID-19 on public websites. As you can see, actually a lot of provinces are not consistently reporting officially on their official government website. Maybe they're reporting via YouTube, maybe they are reporting via Instagram, but not in a manner that can then support interoperability for data to be accessed and to be utilized and aggregated at a national level. And this is something that perhaps you might also be, it could be done around how are different governments producing different laws or regulations with regard to environmental democracy or relevant to environmental democracy, and combine this with seeing how is this having an impact on environmental management in different regions. So, as you can see from the COVID-19 example, we could say that our data ecosystem, there's still a lot that can be improved or supported to increase the way in which our data and our information is reported, is informed to the public, and to also build public trust and public participation. Apologies that last slide is in Indonesian, but just a quick summary of a number of steps that could be taken. First, perhaps around the policy of one data or open data on environment, with regard to environmental data. Similarly with COVID-19, the issues are with data standardization, standards around the metadata, interoperability or interlinkages to be able to share data, as well as human resources to manage and share data. Secondly is around looking at combinations of conventional data with non-conventional data to be able to see the impact of regulations and where there are issues around our environmental democracy and governance, as well as, number 3 is around strengthening the overall data ecosystem that will support, this was with regard to COVID, but that we could use the pandemic to actually build momentum in improving Indonesia's data ecosystem, which will impact directly on environmental democracy. And then 4th is around replicating smart practices undertaken by local governments that can have a broader impact if profiled by central government to support also around issues of environmental democracy. So thank you very much, and I very much look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Pak Agus.
Thank you, Pak Petra. So it's very interesting. So we can see that Pak Petra already lists concrete action actually that can be done, and we can now maybe recommend to the Parliament to actually do an oversight, pushing the government to actually provide this data environment and ecosystem, which with those data will be very useful not only to inform the policy making, like mentioned by Rava, but also will inform the public so that they can participate in more knowledgeable way. So they are not only raising voice, but they are raising voice with education, with knowledge. So that would be excellent. The third presenter will be Bu Nadia. Bu Nadia, time is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for inviting me in this event. It is an honor to me speaking in front of the member of the Representative Council and all the participants today. So it's a pleasure for me to sharing this session with these two inspiring speakers before. And today I will talk about the transparency and green public policy making from legal framework and also from my own experience. So we start with the So I will continue without the screen share, I think. Okay. So we start with the beginning that, as we know, the sustainable development is a common goal of the development around the world. So the government ability to make the right policy is the key to achieving sustainable development. So support, next slide please. So support for the good government based on the transparency, participation, and fairness is needed to achieve this goal. Next slide, please. Next. In the case of Indonesia, in the 2020 to 2024, the medium-term National Development Plan, environmental development as well as increasing disaster resilience and climate change will be directed through the following policy. The first one is the environmental quality improvement. The second is increasing disaster and climate resilience, and the third one is the low carbon development policy. And green growth policy, green growth economy is focused on the low carbon development policy. So regarding this low carbon development policy, Indonesia plans to transform to low carbon economy and build resilience into its food, water, and energy system through this following action. The first one is sustainable agriculture and plantation. And then the integrated watershed management, the reduction of deforestation and forest degradation, the land conservation, the utilization of degraded land for renewable energy, and improve energy efficiency and consumption pattern. So regarding the environmental policy, because of the urgency and the scope of environmental problem, there is a broad consensus supporting better information for the better public policy making. As Principle 10 of Rio Declaration said that, next please, the environmental issues are best handled with participation of all concerned citizens at the relevant level. At the national level, each individual shall have appropriate access to information concerning the environment that is held by the public authorities, including information on hazardous materials and activities in their communities, and the opportunity to participate in decision-making process. State shall facilitate and encourage public awareness and participation by making information widely available. So the access to information principle is built through the constitutional guarantees and special laws for freedom of information and access to environmental information. Next. Provision defining environmental information in the public domain and mechanism for disclosure. And the last one is the organizational infrastructure and capacity to respond and to actively disseminate the information. As launched by the WRI, Indonesia performed very well on the transparency pillar. So the law established a right to access information on request, and the government agency must collect a wide range of environmental information. And the law requires environmental information to be made proactively available to the public. So this legal framework is provided through the law number 14 of 2008 on freedom of information and the law number 32 of 2009 on environmental protection and management. So what kind of environmental information that we need for the public policy making? There is 4 categories of environmental information. The first one is the information about the emergency. So this information enables people to take immediate action to protect their health and environment. So the other one is the regular information about air and water. It will help people make informed choice in their everyday life. It can also be used to pressure the government to take measures to improve the quality of air and water. The third one is information about industrial facility. This information will inform people whether a company is complying with the environmental standards and tell them the amount of pollutant being released into the air, water, soil, and waste stream. And the last one is the information on trend in the many aspects of environment quality, which enable policymakers and also citizens to contribute to more informed public policy making. So, this information in the public domain should include information about the environmental quality and impacts on health, factors that influence it, information about legislation and policy, and advice about how to get the information. Let us see the case in Indonesia. Next. The picture in front of you are the website of the Information and Documentation Management Officer, or what we used to call PPID, Pejabat Pengelola Informasi dan Dokumentasi. The first picture is the website of the Ministry of Environment and Forestry PPID, and the second one is the website of West Java Province PPID, and the last one is the website of Bandung Regency PPID. As you can see in the picture, there is a long list of data and information that people can access. And if we click one of them, next, this kind of information will be appear. There is information about regulation and policy, as you can see, also, and this one is usually the most complete one, and also about the national or regional development plan. It also shows the procedure for obtaining information. And especially for the air quality, the government already provide a signboard you can usually see in the main road in the city. And from this picture alone, it seems that the government has provided a lot of environmental information. And they can claim that they has done their obligation to provide information to the public. But is it true? So I will talk about my experience. Next, please. So as you know, Citarum River made headlines as the dirtiest river in 2018. It's become headlines in CNN if I'm not mistaken. So the task force led by the governor of West Java, based on the presidential regulation number 15 of 2018, made an action plan consists of 3 main policy, 5 strategies, and 12 programs to accelerate control of pollution and damage of Citarum watershed. So as part of expert team in Citarum task force who involved in making action plan, I realized that the data and the information held by the government are still very limited. As you can see in the picture, there's a lot of data that we need to make the program works. Sadly, not all the data are available. To carry out a domestic waste control program, for example, we need information about the amount of domestic waste per day, per city, or per district. Unfortunately, this data is not yet available. So another example is in a critical land management program. We need the data about the landowner data and also the map of critical land. But the access to this information also limited. So without this sufficient data, it's very difficult to determine strategies and carry out planned program. As the result, the expected target is difficult to achieve. We move very slowly in accelerate the control of pollution and damage in Citarum watershed. And the last case may be the omnibus law case. As you know, The process of drafting the job creation bill was carried out secretly by the government since President Joko Widodo's inauguration speech on 20 October 2019 to 12 February 2020 when the bill was submitted to the House of Representatives. The government has ignored public demands for information disclosure regarding the drafting of the bill. The information and participation channel provided on the website are apparently not functioning, so that the public is confused about how to get information related to the job creation bill. In addition to the non-disclosure of drafting procedure, the substance of the job creating law has limited the parties that can be involved in an important part of the permit granting process that has an impact on the environment. So this will be a challenge for community participation in the future. In conclusion, we already have enough regulation which support access to information, but the practice lags behind. Our government is still lacking on provide basic information which is needed in the policy making process. Some information such as information about air pollution is easy to obtain, but some other information such as information about water quality, information about environmental information about industrial facility, the detail of special plans are difficult to obtain or even unavailable. So on the other hand, the job creation law, apart from its own controversy, open up a large space for policy. So basic information, standards, criteria, and procedure are vital instruments in our future development, and it will be a big homework for the government to provide it. So I end my presentation here. Agus, thank you for the time.
Give a big hand. Thank you. It's interesting. Sounds like very familiar that on paper everything seems very good. We have regulation, we have the manual, we have commitment, but in practice we still have some challenges. I don't want to see government is still quite serious, I believe. Maybe this will invite the parliament to play more roles in order to make sure that the government will be more serious in doing that. Okay, I would like to invite questions now. We still have enough time. So we have 3 speakers. Please identify yourself when you ask question. Then mention also to whom you are asking question. Please. Pak Petu, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Moderator, Bapak Agus, and also to the panelists and speaker. First is Mr. Rafa, Bapak Petra, and Dr. Nadia. I would like to give appreciation to those 3 speakers. They give more insightful information to us in order to make public policy, in making public policy. But I start from the last, probably the question, because I think she mentioned one thing about transparency. I think we have to discuss this.
Actually, going to bring out. So there are some contexts which I won't have. You would have.
That Rafa, maybe it's okay. I would like to ask about the process of the transparency in Indonesia right now, Dr. Nadia. How do you see this? I mean, in your presentation, you mentioned about we have now less transparency, but how we can improve this? So maybe you can explain this also. In addition, I think it's very important to involve more, I mean, the community, the people in making policy. And then, in my opinion, I think this is the most important thing, the most important pillar. As we have seen before, a few months ago or a few weeks ago, there's a demonstration on omnibus law. And this is We would like to mention this because in the future we would like to make people more involved in policy making. So how do you see this? And what's the formula to the future? I think we as a parliamentarian really wants to the people to be involved in policy making, but sometimes there are political procedures in it. So I think we in the same page, but in the future I think we have to find a great solution on this, especially on environment democracy. And now my question to Rafa. You mentioned also the barrier, the access to technology, the barrier of education, also the barrier of income. When we focus on green economy, that's not really affecting economic side for the people, and how we can communicate this comprehensively to the people, because we know technologically we are lack of that. Like the governor of Jawa Barat mentioned earlier, we don't have online connection, great online connection. And also in addition, our people, only 7 to 10% is in higher education, have higher education. More than that, only have the fundamental education or lower education. So there's a lot of challenges to it. So how can we actually communicate this, the transparency, to be transparency to the people? I mean, there's there's challenging things to do. And in addition to that, I have a suggestion: local wisdom. In Bali, in my province, we have a adat meeting, local community meeting. How it can be used to communicate the process to making the public policies to the public. I think it's very important also to involve the way people communicate in the community. I think we have to emphasize on it, emphasize on local wisdom and the way people communicate in their local community. In Bali, we call it Banjar. In Banjar, it's like a place where the community could meet, and it's very democratic. Everybody can speak freely over there. And one more to Petra. He mentioned about citizen interests and non-human interests. Which one is more important? Because human and non-human interests. I think we only focusing on citizen. Sometimes the problem is very subjective to people, but also the non-human interest is very important. Like he mentioned, to land, to everything. So actually, which one is more important and how we can combine both? Is it important to combine both? And my last perspective, I think in Indonesia we have great local wisdom. I know in Jawa Barat also the same, but what I know in Bali, there's a philosophy of life called Trihita Karana. In the earliest part of our life, and also the way people live already, they have already respect, not only human, but they have respect to nature. But hopefully in this meeting, we can also give a solution or give more perspective on how local wisdom can be used to promote green economy, to promote also environment democracy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Pak Putu. I think it's better that we directly hand it over to speakers so that they're not going to forget the questions. We will start from Bu Nadia because the first question is actually asked to her. Bu Nadia?
Okay, Pak Agus. Very interesting question from Pak Putu. I will ask permission to answer it in Bahasa if you are not, because I don't want to create misunderstanding because my limited language, English language. So, betul Pak, bahwa sekarang ini transparansi kita dengan adanya undang-undang yang baru ini memang menghadapi banyak tantangan karena memang dengan undang-undang yang baru ini kita diharapkan memiliki basis data informasi yang cukup baik gitu ya. Dan itu menjadi persoalan di lapangan. Saya mungkin berkaca dari pengalaman saya ketika dan sekarang masih berjalan gitu di Satgas Citarum, bahwa memang data-data yang sangat standar, terutama yang terkait sama lingkungan ini masih sangat sedikit gitu karena alasan klasiknya tidak ada dana untuk melakukan untuk mendapatkan data-data tersebut. Tapi sebetulnya data-data tersebut juga there is a mindset that everything must do by the government. So, jadi pemerintah kita berpikir bahwa data itu harus dilakukan oleh mereka, gitu ya, melalui satu proyek biasanya, lalu dikerjakan. Gitu. Padahal data-data itu sebetulnya bisa kita dapatkan melalui kerjasama dengan perguruan tinggi. Di Jawa Barat saja perguruan tinggi kita itu sudah ada ratusan perguruan tinggi yang melakukan penelitian tentang Citarum yang data-datanya sebetulnya bisa digunakan untuk menjadi data dasar. Tentunya engagement seperti itu sekarang sedang kami lakukan di Citarum. Kami melakukan pelibatan masyarakat, juga bekerja sama dengan perguruan tinggi untuk kemudian mendapatkan data-data yang dibutuhkan. Tapi memang ada beberapa data yang tidak dibuka untuk umum dengan alasan keamanan nasional gitu ya Pak ya, seperti data hak milik, HGU gitu ya, hal-hal seperti itu tidak dibuka untuk umum dengan alasan-alasan tadi. Lucunya beberapa pihak justru bisa mengakses data tersebut. Nah tentunya memang diperlukan suatu keseriusan dari pemerintah untuk kemudian membuat tata kelola informasi yang baik, dan itu yang sekarang kami coba gitu ya, bahwa memang tidak cukup hanya kemudian suatu pemerintah meluncur aplikasi gitu kan, lalu sepertinya keren gitu ya, banyak banget isinya nanti ada map, ada apa, tapi ternyata kedalaman datanya tidak ada. Nah, itu yang harus dibangun, dan itu upaya yang tidak mudah memang, karena memang ada ego di antara para pemilik data, para wali data ini juga kadang-kadang tidak mau saling memberi data yang mereka miliki. Tapi memang dengan tujuan bersama seperti di Citarum, karena memang kami sangat punya tujuan yang jelas gitu ya. Kami kan untuk menghindari pencemaran ini tidak karena pencemaran dan kerusakan di Citarum itu kan memang efeknya terhadap 13 kabupaten dan kota, dan terutama juga Jakarta. Tentunya kami punya daya pressure yang lebih tinggi gitu ya untuk mendapatkan data ini. Tapi tentunya ini tidak dimiliki pada setiap case gitu ya. Jadi tidak semua kasus memiliki ini. Tapi sebetulnya ada dan sebetulnya memang masih ada mindset bahwa pemerintah itu lebih sedikit data itu, semakin data dibuka banyak kan semakin masyarakat itu pintar, semakin kemudian bisa memberi masukan, dan itu kadang-kadang yang tidak diinginkan oleh para pemilik kepentingan. Itu mungkin strateginya ya sebetulnya kolaborasi yang terus-menerus. Kami mencobanya sekarang di Citarum, semoga ini kemudian bisa ditularkan kepada proyek-proyek yang lain, terutama dalam beberapa DAS juga sudah mulai belajar bersama kami gitu, bagaimana kemudian mengelola data yang baik dalam suatu pengelolaan DAS yang terintegrasi. Jadi ya bersama-sama Pak, kita lakukannya step by step, pelan-pelan gitu ya, dengan terus-menerus berdiskusi. Tapi saya sih optimis bahwa kita bisa kemudian memulai ini dan kemudian melangkah maju dengan lebih baik.
Thank you, Bu Nada. I think I'd like to also invite Pak Petra, because the question is actually also quite connected to what Parlemen have been developing in collaboration with Bappenas, harnessing the existing data, which might be costly, but might also, find a way that will reduce the cost by maybe using data sharing or something like that. So, Pak Petra, if I can invite you to also address that first question, and you can also answer the question that is directed to you. Pak Petra, time is yours.
Okay, thank you. And Pak Putu, thank you very much for your question. So, Pak Agus should respond in English atau boleh bahasa Indonesia, Pak? Okay. I think there's first with regard to the issue of transparency, and that there's actually a lot of things that we can do that we have seen in COVID-19, that there is not enough consistency in practicing similar standards, similar procedures, similar processes that ensure that information flows can happen, can occur well. So although the information is there, and the data is there, the way in which our ecosystem is still not consistently being developed between different provinces results in data not being shared and not being opened clearly. So that I think it's something that's very addressable, something yang sangat bisa dicapai kalau kita bisa lebih konsisten terhadap beberapa proses dan prosedur yang seharusnya dilaksanakan dan terpantau sebenarnya sejauh mana masing-masing provinsi, masing-masing kabupaten konsisten terhadap standar dan kriteria yang seharusnya dianut masing-masing. Jawa Barat sebagai salah satu contoh yang luar biasa bagaimana keterbukaan datanya dan sharing datanya kalau terlihat dari COVID-19, dan itu seharusnya bisa diterapkan juga ke aspek lingkungan. With regard to your question, Pak Putu, also I just wanted to add that I really like the previous speakers, the role of universities, peran universitas lokal ini, I think is very important. Australia has one example called a regional university network, where universities in the regions are actually reposition themselves not to try to compete with national universities, but they are actually the knowledge hub for their region, and they are actually positioned and they are profiled because of the depth of their knowledge of the local environment, of the local conditions, and that is where they have a comparative advantage. So I really agree with the previous speaker's comment that the role of universities should also be incorporated in this. Pak Putu, I really also think that we have so many knowledge assets in the diversity and the wealth of our cultures. Yeah, your example, for instance, in Bali, but across Indonesia, there is so many. There's so much knowledge that is still to be explored, and that's why I showed the screen on the Global Biodiversity Information Facility. That this is perhaps one way where we can galvanize or we can encourage community participation and actually respect the community's knowledge of their environment and their and how they manage their environment with regard to farming, with regard to religion, with regard to customs. I think this is a very important point, and I think that it could also be linked with Undang-Undang Pemajuan Budaya, our cultural advancement, that if we could link between cultural advancement and environmental democracy, I think there's a lot of things that can be done by interlinking these two priorities or national policies, Pak Putu. But when you ask which is more important, the human interest or the non-human interest, I think that's a key question here, Pak Putu. And it relates to, are we talking about sustainable development, long-term development for our children and our grandchildren, or just short-term development for short-term economic gains? And it links with what Pak Rafa was saying, Rafa, you were saying before about understanding the economic cost of each different investment, is that incorporating what will it cost to non-human elements that actually impact on the productivity, actually impact on economic value? So, in my opinion, and I think again, Balinese is a great example of the culture where both the human and the natural elements are very much in balance, and has to be considered jointly. Thank you, Pak Agus.
Thank you, Pak Petra. Okay, so now let's come to the third question to Rafa. Rafa, are you still on?
Rafa is muted.
Now?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, well, thank you very much for that question. It is a fact that participation in a middle or low income country is a challenge when we are talking about people that perhaps don't have access to the internet. But as the honorable member of parliament mentioned, I too believe that local knowledge is very important. So perhaps I'm not the best place to answer how can participation challenges be addressed in Indonesia. Perhaps there are local stakeholders that have experience in this space that could give me a hand answering to this. But as a framework, I would suggest to have a look at the implementation guide for the Bali guidelines that I mentioned of the year 2015, because they address this issue particularly. They provide a collection, a sample of experiences facilitating environmental democracy, including participation, including access to data, in countries of any profile across the income ladder, with all sorts of demographic and technical challenges. So I will ask Pak Agus to share the document with you. But we at WFD, we are very aware of the fact that if we are going to be supporting our partners in promoting environmental democracy, we need to have answers to this. This is why we are currently developing 2 knowledge products that we will be sharing with you shortly, I hope. And one is precisely about the challenges of participation of minorities in environmental decision making, and the other one is well, having taken note of the success of the experience that the UK has recently had organizing a citizens' assembly to advise the government on their preferences to deliver the commitment of becoming carbon neutral by the year 2050. You know, I mean, we have discussed about this in previous working groups. So we have realized that this is a really important and necessary thing to be replicated in any country, because as the governments become more and more ambitious, well, and they need to become more and more ambitious. So if we want to keep global warming to the safer threshold of 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, this means a big effort in every country. Until now, we have just been cutting a little bit around the edges, changing the light bulbs, energy efficiency. Yes, we are doing changes, but a lot more needs to be done. And with these more ambitious changes come, governments are going to need permission, I would say, that they're going to need this very strong mandate from their people to make sure that these transitions, which are going to define winners and losers in the short term, that they are made in a way that is as fair and as equitable as possible. So participation needs to be on the map, because otherwise climate policy is not going to happen. It's not going to have enough social support. So noting that the experience of the UK is valuable, but also hard to replicate in a country, well, like in a country which has spread over so many islands. For instance, this is before talking to internet access. So we are also developing a research product looking at how to replicate, how to maintain the essence of how the Citizens' Assembly was put together, the representativeness, how to select the people, how to bring them together. Because in the UK, the meetings, at least before the pandemic, they were physical. People traveled every weekend to gather physically in a room to discuss about these things and interaction with experts. So this is going to be a difficult thing in a country with fewer resources or with a more complicated geography. So we want to develop a set of possible methodologies that can be replicated, that can maintain the integrity of the intention of bringing a cross-sectoral sample of people that can truly represent every stakeholder group within society in a country. So we definitely want to work closely with the Parliament of Indonesia, providing support to them as they chart a path for public participation that works for Indonesia. And as I will conclude this answer by saying that I would again invite the members to take an interest in what the government is planning to do about participation on climate policy in particular, because there's lots of best practice experience from other countries that could surely be extrapolated to Indonesia, that perhaps are not on the radar of the government, but that they can certainly be advanced from the parliament. And I believe it is important that the Parliament of Indonesia takes an active role as a delivery space for this participation and process of the government going forward. So I think that the Parliament has there is a lot of things you can be doing. Take an interest in the plans of the government and see how you can put yourself there in that map, on that delivery of participation commitments map, and try to work with government and with civil society there as to what could work well, and to take also note of what has been done in other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, actually I wanted to open one more round. However, because the opening session took pretty much of this session time, so I would like to reduce the time of the session so that we can still have more time for discussion. We can follow up the discussion after the second session, but because one is also related to Pak Putu Rudana question on, actually it's related to public participation, which will also be discussed in the second session. So the point to take away that I try to take from this, and in more detail there will be recording on this and will be summary on this, but at least from the conversation that we have in this session, we know that it is important. Data is very important. Cost and benefit analysis of the environmental for sustainable development is very important, and the Parliament can actually play a role on that. However, there are still challenges. Indonesia have pretty good score on public access to information because we have all the regulation and standard manual. However, there are still issues, challenges to improve the process. Opportunities are there. There are many organizations, including Bksap and other organizations, which are actually working on how to use this data to improve this data access, not only for policymakers, but also for public participation. And finally, Rafa suggests specifically in terms of public participation that citizen assembly is something involving citizens to directly involve in the process is something that can be explored, and there is also possibility to share, to learn from practices from other countries, which WFD, like Rafa mentioned, is happy to be a part of that initiative. With that, I conclude this session. I'd like to give back to Bu Endah.
Let's give a round of applause now. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now at the second session. The discussion will be on public participation in green economy policy making and implementation. The speakers for the discussion will be Pak Andika Putraditama, Sustainable Communities and Business Manager, World Resources Institute, and second speaker Pak Ketut Putra Irawan, the Executive Director of the Institute for Peace and Democracy, and the third speaker, Dr. Marat Priyanta, from the Faculty of Law, Padjadjaran University. And the moderator will be Dr. Yolanda from University of Padjadjaran. Please, already at the head table. Please, Ibu.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Bu Endah, for inviting me here as a moderator. The Honorable Pak Charles Honoris, and Pak Putu, Pak Hafiz, and all the participants today. Before we start this session, maybe let me introduce myself first. My name is Yulinda Daharani. A little bit revised for my title before mentioned Bu Endah mentioned it, because I'm not yet a doctor. Actually, it's on progress to be a doctor. Okay, I'm lecturer at Faculty of Law, Universitas Padjadjaran, and my specificity is on environmental law, spatial planning law, and agrarian law, also energy law. So I will guide this session as a moderator. The session theme is public participation in green economy, policy making and implementation, enhancing the legitimacy of government green growth policies through substantive and inclusive public participation. First of all, I'd like to introducing all the panelists in this session. First panelist is Mr. Andika Putraditama. He's from the World Resource Institute on Sustainable Commodities and Business Manager. Mr. Andika is main job description to drive sustainability within agricultural commodity supply chains that are linked to deforestation. In this role, he shaped strategic partnership with key private sector stakeholders to support their sustainability commitments through the implementation of One Map initiative and better land use monitoring. Prior to being entrusted to the current position, Mr. Andika spent 4 years as a WRI research analyst, working extensively on national policy discussion and technical consultation on the field of sustainable land use, forestry, and sustainable palm oil issues. Before in WRI, he served as program director for National Institute for Democratic Governance. He briefly served as an expert staff to the Deputy Speaker of Indonesian House of Representatives on issues relevant to Indonesia, United States. The next speaker is Dr. Andes Ketut Erawan. Maybe he join us with Zoom application. Mr. Ketut Erawan is currently a senior lecturer in political science based at Udayana University, prior domicile in Bali. He was a faculty member of Social and Political Science faculty of Gadjah Mada University and former director of postgraduate graduate study of Gadjah Mada University. He also took assignment from Dr. Hasan Wirayuda, back then was Foreign Affairs Minister during SBY administration. And the last but not least is Dr. Maret Priyanta, SHMH. He was a member lecturer in environmental law and of Faculty of Law in Padjadjaran University. His focus on environmental law researcher, special planning at the Faculty of Law Padjadjaran University. He also active in various international conferences on climate change related topics addressing the issues of forest fire, global warming, and sustainable development. He also been active to advise the House of Regional Representatives, or DPD RI, during the drafting of several environmental bills. He is currently also served as the Secretary General of the Indonesian Association of Environmental Law Lecturers. Okay, before we start to the first, maybe to Mr. Andika first, based on the agenda. Now, Mr. Andika, we have approximately 10 until 12 minutes to you to present your material. Okay, Mr. Andika, the time is yours. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Bu Moderator. While we're waiting for the slide, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Andika, and allow me to say that it's good to be back among DPR members and expert staff. As Ibu Moderator previously mentioned, I was also an expert staff at the time, staff ahli Kampus Indonesia Amerika back in 2012. So this is familiar setting for me, so this is a very good event. First of all, before I start, I think I'm going to deliver a bit of a overview on why sustainability is becoming a trend now, why every country is talking about green growth suddenly. Next slide, please. And this is, I'm taking a data from a report called the Global Risk Report. It's published by the World Economic Forum. The report itself is developed by interviewing almost 1,000 stakeholders and decision makers, government, academia, private sector, but mostly private sectors. And they, in every year, they're trying to come up with a definition, what would be the biggest risk for this year for the private sector. And so, next slide, please. This is the diagram on the interconnectedness of global risk in the year 2020. As you can see here, the very center of it is climate action failure. And you can see all the lines branching out from the climate action failure. If you failed to handle a climate crisis, it will eventually turn into extreme weather. Extreme weather will turn into food crisis. Food crisis could lead to involuntary migration, political instability, social instability, and so forth. So this is me trying to say that sustainable agenda is no longer an agenda of the activists. It's no longer an agenda of the NGO, bukan lagi agenda LSM saja gitu. But this has become a big concern for private sectors as well. Next slide, please. As you can see here, this is also a likelihood that is being captured in year 2020. From 10 of the risk over the next 10 years, long-term risk, 5 of them are related to environmental concern. So it is extreme weather, climate action failure, natural disaster, biodiversity loss, and human-made environmental disaster. And then if you look into the short-term risk outlook, apparently 2 out of 5, 2 dari 5, is related to environmental concern as well. The first one is extreme heat wave, and the second one is destruction of natural ecosystem. Again, if you look into the report, there's a scenario, and this is quite a likelihood scenario. If a tornado happened in the east coast of the United States, at the same time when torrential rain happened in Brazil, suddenly the global soy supply kedelai dunia, will be cut off by 1/3. Sepertiganya bakal terputus at the same time. So this is, the report is very good in explaining what will happen to the world economy, what would happen to the supply chain of global company like Unilever, like Nestle, PepsiCo, if we fail to handle the climate crisis. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, there's also a change in perception. The way to read this diagram is going from below. So below, in the year 2007, maybe it's too small on the screen, but below the diagram, you can see that there's a lot of colors there. There's red, there's purple, there's blue. Those are not environmental concern. But as you go upwards, it's becoming clearer that green is becoming more and more prominent, which means that every single year, environmental concern becomes more and more top priority among the business sector. So again, this is showing why we suddenly talk about green growth all the time now. And this is becoming a top priority issue globally as well. So that's a brief overview for me, from me to explain about, this is no longer an activist agenda anymore. Next slide, please. And there's another slide on the private sector commitment. As you can see here, there's a trend from companies to commit to a more sustainable practices. You can see here that the number of companies who commit to no deforestation commitment within their supply chain is becoming more and more each year. They want to clean up their supply chain, and we're talking about big companies like Unilever, Nestle, Coca-Cola. They want to ensure that their consumers are aware that their product contains no deforestation. Again, this is a global trend, and I think the impact of this has already been felt in Indonesia. Next slide, please. Now we'll see how Indonesia fares in this scenario. Next slide. So this is the profile of Indonesia emission historically. So we're looking into Indonesia emission back from 1990, tahun 1990, up until 2016. As you can see here, the top of the line, which is quite far away from the other lines, is emission coming from land use change and forestry. This is another term to describe that the emission is coming from, deforestation, peatland degradation, peatland fires. The other sector only contributes maybe half of it. Energy, so if we're talking about coal generation, it's far, far less than the emission produced by deforestation. I think, as you can see there, the trend is still increasing, and the emission trend from energy sector is also increasing. But this is basically to say that if Indonesia can handle deforestation, we can definitely reduce our emission profile significantly. Next. And to that, it's a segue for me to explain about the Low Carbon Development Initiative that is being proposed by Bappenas. And this is already being taken into account into our RPJMN, or our long-term development plan. So within this low carbon development growth plan, penurunan emisi gas rumah kaca, the reduction of emission, has become one of the 6 macro indicator in our state budget. And so if we have a good scorecard in the economic growth, if we have a good scorecard on Gini ratio, if we have a good scorecard in poverty reduction, but have a bad scorecard on emission reduction, it actually means that the government has failed to fulfill its promise in the development of the state. Next slide. And this is the scenario that Bappenas projected in 2045. So the Low Carbon Development Initiative is coming up with a very complex modeling called the system dynamic modeling that takes into account all of these factors, deforestation, soil depletion, water scarcity, etc. Taking into account how would it look like if we change the way we develop our economy, if we go through the sustainability pathway. And apparently, the economy is doing better compared to the business as usual if we don't do any intervention. So based on Bappenas projection, if we go into the sustainability pathway, apparently our annual growth will be at 6%. We can reduce the poverty down to 4.2%. We can reduce the premature death because of pollution by 40,000 people per year. It's all a good thing. So green economy or sustainable pathway does not necessarily against economic growth. And I think this is one of the biggest contention of sustainable development. If we go through the sustainability pathway, we're actually doing better on the economy. So that's the key message on this Low Carbon Development Initiative by Bappenas, which is really, really good. Next. In terms of micro policy, we have a couple of items here, and all of them are related to land. For example, the first one is moratorium izin hutan, the forest moratorium that has now become permanent. The second one is a palm oil moratorium, because the government wants to pause the new license of palm oil and to reform the industry first, not to kill the industry. And then you can see on the list, there's a ISPO revision, there's a One Map initiative, kebijakan satu peta, there's restorasi lahan gambut, and so on and so on. But the question is, are this policy have a strong legitimacy? That's the question that we're trying to answer here. Next slide. And to answer that, I'm going to deep dive into the Environmental Democracy Index that has been mentioned by Pak Charles in his remarks, and a couple of speakers have touched on this. So WRI developed this Environmental Democracy Index and look into the laws and regulations of 70 states, and it is measured against the 2010 UNEP Bali guidelines. This is actually guidelines of legislation to look into the environmental governance aspect of it. Next slide. So this is the actual score. There's 3 big score that is being measured. The first one is the right to access information, hak untuk mengakses informasi, and our score is 2.33. The highest score is 3, so it's quite good. It's almost 2.5, so it's quite good. The second aspect that we're trying to measure is the right to participate in a meaningful way in decision-making process. So, hak untuk berpartisipasi secara berarti dalam pengambilan keputusan. As you can see there, the score is quite low. Actually, it's the lowest among the 3, 1.33. And the third one is the rights to get justice and advocating for enforcement of environmental law. Again, the score is below 2, so 1.73. So it's not bad, but it's not good as well. But then let's take a deep dive as well into the indicators. I want to highlight the indicators with the weakest score. Next slide, please. So here is the indicators that makes up the big score. The first one is environmental information in public domain. We only scored 2. Apparently, the information that we put on public domain is not that comprehensive, as Ibu Dr. Nadia mentioned earlier. The second is on informed participation. If the society participate in a decision-making process, they might not be informed. Mereka tidak memiliki informasi yang cukup untuk berpartisipasi. So we scored 0.67, which is quite low. I'm going to skip ahead and then look into the effective enforcement below. Our enforcement, penegakan hukum on laws related to environment as well as transparency of public information is quite low as well, 0.83. So this again reiterates that we already have a very good legal and regulatory infrastructure. It's done. It's basically done. But what is lacking is enforcing those laws into an actual practice, which is far ahead of our neighbor, for example, Malaysia. Malaysia scored so much lower than all of us. But they're taking active steps right now to remedy that, and they're taking a more progressive stance on data transparency, which I will explain later. Next slide. This is a case that I want to highlight. I think Ibu Dr. Nadia also mentioned this a couple of times on the HGU transparency. Next slide. So back in 2015, 2015, we had a massive forest fires, and the World Bank calculated that the cost of the forest fires is actually twice the cost of tsunami reconstruction. If you can imagine that. Biaya forest fires tadi sebetulnya 2 kali lebih besar daripada rekonstruksi tsunami Aceh. That's a lot. But we never hear about this in the decision-making processes because what we usually fed is the narrative that palm oil brings money, pulp and paper brings money. But we never talk about the consequences of doing palm oil and doing pulp and paper in sustainable manners. And it's not against palm oil. It's just suggesting a different way to grow the palm oil. Next slide. So in order to see which companies are breaking the law, we need an exact boundary of that company. And as you can see here, this is Kalimantan Islands. All the red polygons are palm oil. All the yellow polygons are pulp and paper concession. All of this Kalimantan Island has already been covered by concession. But you need this data, you need this information to pinpoint who should be responsible for the forest fires. And so, beginning in 2015, there's a push for the government to open up the data of this polygon. Next slide. And a lot of civil society asked the government via the Komisi Informasi Publik, the Public Information Commission, and one of the case in Komisi Informasi Publik actually won the case and basically tells the government to open up the data. And then the government appeals to the Supreme Court. Mereka naik banding ke Mahkamah Agung. Mahkamah Agung, to our surprise as well, wins the case and basically say that HGU should be open to all. But up until today, the government is not following what the Supreme Court has ordered up until today. So because of this, we have no accountability in how we manage our land. We have potential loss of state revenue. Kenapa kita punya potensi kehilangan pendapatan negara? Because if we don't know the exact boundary, we don't know exactly how much taxes that this company should pay. So again, this is also a problem of economy. And what I'm trying to say here, the technical solution is there. So WR Indonesia, we've been engaging with the company, with the association, as well as government agency to look into the middle ground. What's the problem of opening this data? Apparently they are concerned if we open up the data, someone would alter that. Ada orang yang bisa mengubah-ubah batasnya, which is a very valid concern. But we talked to some government agency, one of them is Badan Cyber dan Sandi Negara, BSSN, and BSSN actually say that there's a technical solution called digital signature for spatial data. Jadi pakai tanda tangan elektronik untuk mengamankan data itu dan kita bisa buka datanya. So solution, a technical solution exists, but the push to cover the data is too big, and we haven't had a success until today to open the HGU data. Next slide.
Pak Andika, sorry, maybe you can go to conclusion.
Yes. Next slide kalau gitu biar cepat. Next slide lagi. Okay, this is my last slide. So I'm not gonna end my presentation with a conclusion, but this is more of a question and discussion and challenge. The first challenge is, apakah institusi politik seperti DPR telah mendapat gambaran akurat realita pelaksanaan transparansi dan akuntabilitas pembuatan kebijakan publik? And this is a important question to answer. If not, kalau belum mendapat realita di lapangannya, dan urgensi untuk membawa isu ini di DPR mungkin juga memang masih rendah gitu. So we need to understand from all of you, honorable member, to also discuss about this. The second question is, apakah DPR telah melaksanakan prinsip keterbukaan data dan akuntabilitas dalam berbagai proses kedewanan? This is also a very important one. And the third one, actually I'm interested in number 3. How can a political institution like DPR RI, like the House, can push the execution, the implementation of data transparency and accountability? The regulation is already there, and you saw that the score is quite high, but implementation is low. And we know that DPR can summon the minister, DPR can summon Dirjen. It's going to be a very powerful statement if DPR can help, civil society to move this agenda forward with your authority. And I hope this provokes a good discussion among us this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Big applause to Mr. Andika. Such an interesting presentation. Allow me to highlight this presentation. Mr. Andika talked about the global risk and the green growth concern in business sector and Bappenas projection. And then the last, it's interesting because Mr. Andika put some trick question to all the parliament here maybe, so we can discuss it together. Before we move to the next panelist, I already saya diberitahu oleh panitia kalau karena kita panelisnya ketiganya adalah orang Indonesia mungkin bisa ganti bahasa, tapi itu it's depend on Mr. Ketut or Mr. Maret is up to you to kalau misalnya memang sudah mempersiapkan bahasa Inggris, it's okay to be English, but we go to the next panelist, Pak Ketut. Maybe you have same 12 minutes from now.
Yes. Yeah. Can you listen me? Can you hear me?
Can hear you, Pak Ketut, silakan.
Yes, please. Can anybody help me to run my PowerPoint? Okay. I tried to put my presentation in such a short time, 12 minutes, but tackling a really important question, which is how to make green growth. Come back to the title, please. Title? Okay. How to make the green growth economy in Indonesia legitimate? Because the question of legitimacy is really important for us to tackle. Rafael Jimenez Aibar already mentioning how the issues of economy, ecology, green growth is not well debated at the public discourse. So the citizen is not well engaged in the understanding about these issues comparing to many other countries. And also representative institution in Indonesia like our DPR is not a most popular institution in Indonesia. The score of popularity of this institution is still low. So the provocative question is now how to make the green growth economy in Indonesia legitimate, because the question is how to make the citizen well engaged and how the representative institution work together with the citizen assembly to make the agenda for that one. In order to make this presentation, I'm having 8 slides basically. Go to the outline. Next. Yes. First, I will mention about what is the main question need to be tackled. Second, I will discuss about how should we see the values and interest in the ecology or environmental politics. And the third, we should discuss about how deliberative democracy as a new way of seeing democracy, which is beyond procedural democracy. The fourth is we discuss about this. I'm trying to offering solution because many of the before raising question. Now I try to put my answer. I hope we can debate this answer. First, we should have a bridge between citizen and the parliament. I call it mini publics. Some countries mentioning about citizen assembly. And then by creating this bridge, we need to rejuvenate and then put the representative institution in a different way of functioning. And then we try to connect this to sphere into the public sphere. And then and the last point I try to make is that how can we reimagine this new way of thinking ahead? Continue, please. This is the question. It's a lot of questions. I just nailed down some of them while I'm discussing about this one. Okay, continue. This is my presentation plan. If I have no time to finish, when asking a question about what is the nature of green growth economic policies or environmental policies, it's totally different than the way we see other policies. As mentioned by Petrarca, if I'm not mistaken, that plurality of values and interests, because we know now to count not only human interests and human values, but also non-human values. Not only counting what happened now, but also we try to discuss about what is the future. So the plurality of values and interests, meaning that the values and interests of human now, human in the future, non-human now, and also all of the related. Non-human is including the nature, including also the material thing. So why could deliberative democracy be responsive? Because I think that deliberative democracy is a new seeing democracy because the legitimacy is a main point. And what institution option? How to make this aspiration of democracy manifested? I believe we need to do 2 things. One is that creating the citizen assembly, meaning that citizens who well informed about the issues of ecology and environmental democracy, and also we need to reconnect this one with the representative institution. And the last one, how to make this roadmap step by step, maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, we will see the policy, which is not only legally created, but also legitimately implemented. Continue. This is the thing, I quoted from Graham Smith, which is one of the main author of the environmental democracy. He mentioned about that when we see the environmental policies or economic based on green growth, we need to see the plurality of environmental values and interests. As I mentioned before, it is a contemporary non-national, meaning that we cannot put a clear boundary. This is Indonesia, this is outside Indonesia, because sometimes the hate issue is beyond nation. It's affecting our neighborhood countries. Second is future generation is we discussed, because when we depleted the resources now, we owe problem with our future generation, and also non-human, as mentioned by some speaker. All of these three are poorly represented in deliberative and decision of liberal democratic institutions. So I'm totally different, give a different point of view. Why I think liberal democratic institution is not enough to deal with this environmental democracy. Continue. This is the slide 2. This is the slide 3. I'm guaranteed to you that I will discuss on the 8th slide. Okay. The third slide is that deliberative democracy responses to the problem of environmental democracy. Because this way of thinking democracy, which is promises institutions that promote democratic deliberation, meaning that we're not only creating representative institution, but we force our representative institution like our DPR to be more inclusive, to reason and have a dialogue with the people about the issues matter, including environment issue, and be sensitive about the plurality of the values, about the future, about the environment, about non-human, about complexity of the issues, and then make political judgment by considering different perspective of non-human world, and also about the future. So I mentioned so many times the word future, non-human, human, all of those need to consider when we discuss about environmental democracy. The fourth slide. This is the thing I try to offer in Bali, but I not discuss it more fully. Mini publics, meaning that we need to create and develop the institution consists of people who well informed and trained to understand these issues, but they are randomly selected. I quote from Curato because she's mentioning the design forum that brings together diverse group of people randomly selected to deliberate on specific issue and formulated some form of outcome based on this deliberation. So we should create this bridge between the citizen and the DPR. Why? Because the issues of environmental is quite specific, it's so long term and need well-focused groups to discuss that. It should be small because we need to ask this group to be deliberative, to discuss it more continuously, many dimensions of the problem. And they should be public, meaning that they should be representative enough to be democratic. So they should be, one of the method is in democratic expertise, like I do, we use randomly selected citizen to create this mini public. Continue. Number 5 is that, okay, if we create the bridge between the DPR or parliament with the people, what happened with our DPR? Again, I quote Curato because she mentioned that the institution of representative democracy should not be replaced, because should be supplement. The new mechanism should enhance the existing legal mechanism. So it is not replacement, it is connecting the parliament with the civil society organization, with the media, with all of the dynamic of our citizen engagement. So the bridge should become a supplement, not replacement. So what should the Parliament do? It should strengthen its institution as through the public scrutiny. So it should be much more open now because a bridge is there. Second, this should bring also political parties to deliberate inside of the political parties on issues matter like environment. And the third one, we should push also the media to be deliberative, meaning that they should discuss the issues, put the fact on the table and discuss it for the sake of the future of our environment and democracy. Okay, number 6 is not only the state, which is DPR, and also the bridge, the citizen assembly need to be rejuvenated, need to be created, but also the public sphere. Why is public sphere? Public sphere meaning that the boundary between the media and the state, the media with the people. Why Hendrik Bersan Boswell conduct research? Because she found that citizens often disconnected from their elected representative. They are fractured and polarized in public sphere and alienated from the complex system of public policy. So the bridge is so needed right now, and the process need to be understood that way. Number 7. Okay, this is the roadmap, which is again I follow what Curato et al. Mentioned in her book. She said that mini publics, which is should curb or reduce the illegitimate power, meaning that the disparity of people who have no voice, so they have somebody who speaking under their name. This should create generative productive power, meaning that they should be able to make the power is not only meaning only the way of manipulating your opponent, but a way to produce something positive, particularly policy which is for the sake of the need of the people in the future. So the mini public can do a lot of things, and the roadmap to do is by first creating the mini public. Second, connecting them with the representative. Third, create a link between mini public with the media and civil society. And the fourth, making the mini public as an experiment of democratic innovation among citizens. Okay, the last one. This is my reflection. Mini publics are important democratic innovation, but they are not panacea, meaning that they are not a cure for everything. Because when our DPR has an issue of legitimacy, has an issue and creating like a sloppy public policy, they are not replacing them. They are rejuvenating them so they can have a bridge into the data, into the understanding of the people, and into the future of what people need. That's what I mean by legitimate democratic environmental democracy. That's all the point I tried to share. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ketut. It's time for Mr. Ketut for the interesting presentation. Allow me to highlight your presentation, only 8 slides, and you're talking about the plurality of values and interests, non-human, human, and the future, and then the deliberative democracy responses, and the representatives institutions should strengthening the institution of public sphere, deliberation in political parties, and toward deliberative media. Okay, for the little highlight in Paketut presentation. Okay, next I will invite the last but not least, the panelists here, Mr. Dr. Maret Prianta. Please, Pak Maret, you have same time, 12 minutes approximately, to present your material.
Okay, thank you, Bu Yulinda. Dear Honorable Member of Parliament, dear participant, allow me also to presentation in English, but in some terminology I will use bahasa. because there is also the legal terminology. It's very difficult to interpretation in English. First, thank you. Please help my presentations. And first of all, I also want to clarifications. My legal name is Marat Priyanta, not Priyatna, because we're living in so because we are living in West Java, sometimes the people is very confusing with my name. So I'm from Faculty of Law, Unpad, and we have a Department of Environment, Spatial and Agrarian Law. In Indonesia, we call it Departemen Hukum Lingkungan, Tata Ruang, dan Agraria. So we have some lecture is also teaching about the environment, spatial planning, and also the agrarian law. So, dear participants, honorable member of Parliament, allow me also to give some perspective from the legal perspective, actually related to the green economy concept. I claim it as a concept of the global concept of green economy, and related with the public participation and the focus on the decision policy making in Indonesia. Please, the first slide. My first slide, maybe before I enter into the issues of the green economy, allow me also to give us one important question. The question is, Indonesia stays still as a developing country, or maybe we are now can claim we are as a developed country? Maybe we can answer this question from a lot of perspective, but allow me to start my answer this question from the earlier in 1980, 40 years ago, our professor in Unpad, Professor Munajat Danusaputro, argued that he identified at least 4 environmental issues on the developing country 40 years ago, and the first issue is about the populations. Kang Emil mentioned before about the population in the developing country, and at some or several developing countries, a large number of population will be the main issue. The second one is poverty. Some people living under standard, unhealth, and maybe unrecognized. That's the issue. And Professor Munajat claimed these 2 issues cause the pollutions. Pollution can be caused by the action by the individual, the group of people, and sometimes the corporations. That's the third issue. And the last, in the several developing countries, we still talk about the policy issue. The policy also involving the state, the government. So the next question I want to also share is, how is the condition of Indonesia today? Are we still discuss about social welfare? We are still discuss about the environmental issues? And perhaps we also still discuss about the prosperity from economic perspective. And the last one, how the government intervention or the activity of the society today. Maybe this is the pessimistic issue, but not like that. And for the last 40 years, from the legal perspective, our government is already established a lot of the regulation how to solve these 4 problems, the populations. So today we can also state that the population issue in the last 4 years will be the potency, a large of number of people, the pollution, and also we have a regulation related to it. Okay, this is the first slide. Please, next slide. The second slide, I would like also mention about one concept that we know as the paradigm. Paradigm, by definitions, is a basic perspective held by the majority of the scientific community in solving problems. So how in Indonesia, sometimes the government, when they want to make a decision policy making, they involve the scientists. The scientists, and they discuss, and they then make a decision like that. But the question is how the paradigm in the developing country. As we know that the developing country issue is most about the conflict between economy and environment. And the social is middle of it. So when they talk about the economic, the impact to the social, the environment also impact to the social interests. Mr. Andika mentioned before related to these issues. And in my perspective, also in Indonesia, unfortunately, until today, the paradigm as the basic principles, not only for individuals, but a group of peoples, governments, legislation process, and including law enforcement. Mr. Andika mentioned about Mahkamah Agung before, that the decisions representative the economic perspective or environmental perspective. But so this conflict always happening in the policy making process in Indonesia. Meanwhile, as mentioned before, as we know, since 72, we have a international conference of environment, and everyone in this world talk about the human-oriented. But after 92, Rio de Janeiro, we start talking about the sustainable development. We start talking about the sustainability, and now we're talking about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And the question how Indonesia have to face today related to this issue, we are still think about the conflict of the perspective from the developing country, or step by step, I think we already moved to the developed country. It's depend on the paradigm, not for the government, but also for the individuals, including the public. Okay, please the next slide. Ladies and gentlemen, this is my next slide, and I enter into the legal perspective, and I'm claim there is a public participation on development legal document process in Indonesia. I identify at least three main documents when we want to talk about the development, when we want to talk about the environmental issues. And the first document, as we know, as the National Development Plan, or Rencana Pembangunan Nasional. This is from the national level under the local governments. And as we know, there is one process of participation. It's what we call as musrenbang. And how the musrenbang today, we can answer the next issues. And the second documents, there is also mentioned clearly, actually, in Law Number 32, 2009. There is one document, maybe this is unfamiliar, we never heard about these documents. It's Environmental Protection and Management Plan. And I claim it's that the substance of this plan is environmental oriented. And when the National Development Plan, it's the substance, it's economic oriented. But today, actually, after Omnibus Law Job Creations, we probably hear a new document plan, as we know as spatial plan, or Rencana Tata Ruang. This is actually the substance, it's optimalizations of environment, economic, and social interests. There is a lot of decision-making process on this Rencana Tata Ruang, because the method is very comprehensive and hopefully can solve the conflict, the authority, conflict kewenangan between central governments, between sector, and also between the local government in Indonesia. That's the function of the Rencana Tata Ruang Indonesia. But as regulation said clearly, actually, there is one more documents that bound these three documents, as we know as Strategic Environment Assessment, or KLHS. We are sometimes avoid this document, but when we want to talk about sustainability, when we want to talk about the green economy, actually this document is very important to strengthen and powering by all people in Indonesia when we want to talk the environmental issue. Because when we talk about the basic legals, it's clearly stated that government and local governments are obligated make the KLHS to ensure that sustainable development has been the basic and integrated in the development area and policy plan and also programs. This is, I think, the three documents that mention the development process in Indonesia. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is why I choose the Rencana Tata Ruang as the basic documents. It's clearly stated in Law 11/2020, Job Creations, Omnibus Law, in the Article 14, page 11, that all activity based on allocation activity or business for the investment interest, for the environmental issues, it must be based on the spatial plan. So this is, I claim, as the first door for all activity in Indonesia. So why next we don't strengthen the public participation on process to establish this document? Because this document is legally binding in every level of our legislations, from the national to the local governments. Even as we know, influence of the political infrastructure development now sometimes interfere so many planning in spatial planning. But when we want to say the public participation, this is a very important document, I think, today. And meanwhile, in the other hand, in the other side, also the KLHS, based on Article 48, page 22, Job Creations Law, it's also mentioned clearly that implementation of spatial planning based on the strategic environmental assessment. This is maybe some our opportunity when we want to talk about the green economy, because the substance of Rencana Tata Ruang is collaborations between the environment and also the economic perspective, and also consideration the social impact. Okay, next slide, please. This is just illustrations that in practice, in the left side, that's the process of spatial planning. In the right side is the process of KLHS, different step, 5-step and 10-step for KLHS. But in some part, we have integrations to process of public consultations in Indonesia. And when the first first integration between these two documents, there is also collecting data and informations. And when the other team also identified the issues of sustainable development. And because this chart still on process on Kementerian Atr BPN, and the end of the process of KLHS team, they have to validate and validasi, because Walidata is on the environmental institution. So why this is not will be our opportunity how to make the green economy to the next future, I think. Okay, next slide. This is my dissertation in 2017 actually. My dissertation is related about the spatial planning based on the climate change. Based on the climate change, I try to identify a lot of issues on the climate change and put on the spatial planning. Spatial planning, and this is also answer Mr. Andika about legitimacy, where we can state clearly about the protected area, the cultivation area, when we see that strategic environmental assessment or KLHS also mentioned about the issue of mitigation and adaptation of climate change. When we want to talk about the Rencana Tata Ruang, because 20 years period, it's very futuristic, we can see a global view of it. We can choose the locations that we want to keep for 20 years, and also we can also state the cultivation area such as agriculture, fishery, mining, industry, tourism, and other activity. So in spatial planning, we can also claim that the protected area, it should be support to the mitigation process. When the cultivation area, we have to also adaptation of the climate change. So the green economy policy actually, based on the legal perspective, we must strengthen the spatial planning based on the climate change issues. Okay, the next slide. This is the paradigm planning from the legal aspect. In Indonesia, maybe I can say that kita merencanakan sesuatu, tapi kita mengerjakan yang tidak kita rencanakan. That's habit actually. Gitu. It's okay if individuals have a paradigm like that, but the government must clearly based on the regulation, planning regulations. So we have to move the paradigm about the planning from the legal aspect. The first I want to mention about the conception of the legal theory. This is mentioned from our professor, Mohtar Kusumaatmaja, about the role of law, that the law actually by regulations must be standing in front, not follower, because this can be determining directions for the next generation if we want to talk about the sustainability. And law also can be corrective, futuristic, and also anticipatory. And the planning process is policy. So when we talked about the planning, it is the policy, decision making is involved. And the last, piloting the plan is piloting against the law. This is how the paradigm should move forward from the perspective of legal, because in some regulation related to environmental and spatial planning, there is a sanction and penalty not only for the individual but also for the governments. I think we hear about how change of the job creations, that administrative sanction it's a priority than a penalty sanction. The next two slides, probably this is same with the speaker before. I also came with a question, and a lot of questions actually. Maybe we can discuss it about public participations. I also quote from the definitions. The strengthen it's the activity by the private citizens. This is different when we talk about the legislation process, because the public participation also we have to state about the private citizen, and they decide to influence the government's decision making. That's the first principle. So by terminology, it's the public. If we are related with the climate change and environment degradation, maybe we need to be able to voice their concern and influence policy making for the right decision to be made, and for this choice to have legitimacy. And then participation is the right for citizens to participate meaningfully in environmental decision making. So I'm also say some question, and we probably must be solved next forward. It's who is the public? This is we must be answered in Indonesia. What they need. The third one, what their role? If we are invite them, what we need from them. Then what kind of data and information should government share? If we are talking about the data, it's different with the informations. Not everyone can read the data, but everyone, I think, can accept the information. Because this is related to transparency. Also, when sometimes we are involved in several public participations, sometimes the information about impact to the economy, impact to the environment, is sometimes not too clear, say by the governments.
Pak Maret, sorry, you have 1 minute left.
Okay, this is my last slide, I think. Then the next issue is what kind of information and data that easy to understand to the public. This is a very important thing. What kind of data and information easy to understand to women, young peoples, indigenous group, people with disabilities and others. So in practice, actually, public participation, sometimes government always dominate the process and issue. In practice, pemerintah kecenderungannya untuk terlalu mengintervensi atau terlalu dominan dalam public participation. So sometimes the public participation itu berubah menjadi sosialisasi. That's very unfortunate because dana yang digunakan juga cukup besar. Okay, next, this is my last slide. So I give some perspective related to the green economy and public participation legal key to sustainable development. The first one is improvement quality of KLHS on planning process, improvement quality of public participation also in planning process, and from legal perspective, law as a tool of social engineering, we have to put it in front, not a follower. We must also redefine what kind of the meeting on public, on the policy decision making, improvement and the redefine actually mechanism of participation. And this very important thing is public is a subject, not an object. So that's the paradigm we should change. And state actually through the governments must trust to the public. That's the main issue, I think. We must trust to the public, and I think the philosophy of the job creation is trust to the public, to the people in Indonesia. And the last is, this is my opinion, that's Tata Ruang as a major legal document to achieve green economy and sustainable development in Indonesia. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Give it big applause to Pak Maret. We see in the law perspective from Pak Maret, he said environmental issues and then the decision making in development country, conflict between economy and environment, and then we have the three document, law on public participation. We already have it, national development plan, environmental protection and management law, and special law. And the last is in practice, public participation is going to be to socialize. So this public is subject, not an object, and we have to trust the public, especially government must trust the public. Okay, there's the three panelists already have their presentation. Now we're going to discussion here. Maybe what until what time? Sorry. Okay. We have 15 minutes left to discussion. For the question, maybe can bisa bahasa Inggris ataupun bahasa Indonesia. Lebih nyaman untuk para penanya memakai bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia. It's okay. Please, maybe we have a question in this room first. This or maybe we have a participant from other. Okay, Pak Mardani, please.
Makasih. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Really thank you for Andika, Maret, sama Pak Putu, ya. Pak Ketut, ya. Really interesting what Andika said about the data. That when we focus on the green economy, it doesn't mean that we harm the normal economy. So, but right now we have a COVID-19 pandemic that greatly impact our ability to build the development in Indonesia. So, do you have any projection about development on the green economy development? On the era of COVID-19 or after COVID-19, because we see that the GDP drop not only in Indonesia but quietly in so many areas in the world. So I think I would like to have some kind of insight from Andika about that. The other things to Pak Maret, it's about the omnibus law. Yeah. In my opinion, some of the content on omnibus law is look like against the green economy. Say that AMDAL, for example, is a little bit quite loose compared to the previous regulations. So, is there any analysis from the Maret or Padjadjaran University about the impact of omnibus laws on the slowdown of the green economy projections that has been mapping by the Bapenas? Because in my opinion, this omnibus law can greatly impact our dream to have a green development. Last but not least,
is about some, okay, Andika first. We have quite good numbers, 2.33 about the legal framework, but in terms of executions, we have quite low numbers. Many NGO is facing the lawsuit by the big company by using the Undang-Undang ITE, yeah, especially point 27, 28, or 29. Some of the distinguished persons I read in the Tempo in this week that the French persons should be outlawed from Indonesia because release the data about the previous kebakaran hutan that is not suitable according to the government. How can you propose that we increase our law enforcement process? Because sometimes the government said that it doesn't belong to us, it's belong to the judiciary system, but this greatly impact our implementations in equal informations to the public. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Pak Mardhani, for the question. Maybe Pak Andika first to answer the question, first question and the last question maybe.
Baik, terima kasih. Ini nggak ada lagi yang dengerin dari internasional ya? Iya, Pak ya? Sama.
Masih ada sih Pak, tapi boleh dalam bahasa Indonesia karena ada penerjemahannya juga walaupun di Zoom. Ada Pak, ada.
Iya Pak Mardhani. Ya Pak Mardhani, terima kasih pertanyaannya, ini sangat menarik karena kita juga sedang mengerjakan kalkulasinya Pak. Jadi secara global sekarang ada narasi pasca pandemik ini terminologinya adalah build back better Pak. Build back better ini sebetulnya terminologi yang biasa dipakai. Ini sebetulnya apa? Kita sebutnya post disaster recovery. Istilah build back better ini sesuatu yang cukup umum gitu. Nah, sekarang kita mau gunakan terminologi build back better ini untuk post pandemic dan for green growth gitu. Nah, satu contoh yang kami coba lihat adalah Korea Selatan, Pak. Jadi Korea Selatan itu di tahun 2009 pasca krisis ekonomi tahun 2008 yang gara-gara housing crisisnya Amerika, mereka menggelontorkan stimulus fiskal besar-besaran. Tapi ternyata yang unik adalah 80% stimulus fiskalnya dia itu diarahkan untuk green investment. Jadi dia mencoba investasi di green electricity grid, transportasi yang sustainable, etc. lah. 80% Pak. Ternyata dampak dari investasi yang sustainable green investment ini sangat terlihat ketika kita membandingkan growth-nya South Korea dibandingkan OECD country lainnya di tahun 2009. Akhirnya mereka berhasil menciptakan 960.000 green jobs dan dampaknya ini long term gitu. Bayangkan mungkin kalau Indonesia pasca pandemi instead of investing more on batubara, coal dan lain-lain, tapi kita invest di green recovery, mungkin investasinya lebih long lasting karena momentum pasca pandemik ini kan pemerintah punya punya momen dan justifikasi untuk menggelontorkan fiskal yang cukup besar. Ini alangkah lebih baiknya kalau diarahkan ke sana. Mungkin jawaban singkat saya sih di sana Pak Mardhani, tapi as soon as kita selesaikan analisanya, I'll make sure ini ada komunikasi juga ke DPR Pak. Yang kedua, ini Pak Mardhani sepertinya bicara mengenai ini apa ya, scientistnya C4 ya, David Gavo. Saya sebetulnya personally saya kenal juga dengan David. Iya, tinggal di Bali dia. Betul Pak. David ini ketika dia merilis data kebakaran hutan, kalau kita bicara scientific value ya Pak ya, beda metode kan akan menghasilkan beda angka. Ini sebetulnya tidak bisa dikategorikan sebagai misinformasi atau hoax gitu, tapi selama dua metodologinya dibuka penuh, mestinya ini diperlakukan sebagai diskursus ilmiah, diskursus saintifik gitu. Tapi saya paham kenapa ini menjadi sesuatu yang sangat kontroversial untuk pemerintah saat ini gitu. Mungkin yang perlu diantisipasi ke depan adalah bagaimana pemerintah menciptakan ruang-ruang diskusi dengan basis pemahaman ini adalah diskursus ilmiah gitu. Kalau kita mau maju dengan green growth, mau nggak mau kita akan undang banyak saintis yang akan berkontribusi dengan banyak modelnya masing-masing, model ekonomi, model lingkungan hidup, dan harus ada ruang bebas untuk mereka. Pertama adalah melihat data yang dimiliki oleh government, kedua adalah mengkritisi trajektori pembangunan kita, dan ketiga adalah proposing alternatif trajektori gitu Pak. Mudah-mudahan ini dianggap sebagai juga domainnya pemerintah gitu, karena saya rasa fasilitasi pemerintah dalam hal ini akan sangat penting untuk memberikan ruang gerak yang fleksibel bagi organisasi seperti organisasi ilmiah yang mengandalkan data gitu Pak. Mungkin itu sementara Pak Ali.
Okay. Next question, maybe Pak Mara to answer second question and the last question. Thank you.
Baik, terima kasih yang terhormat Pak Mardani, terima kasih atas responnya. Tapi yang untuk ITE mungkin Pak Andi tadi saya pikir ya, jadi saya tidak prepare jawabannya Pak. Nah, terkait dengan Omnibus Law Pak, jadi ada dua implikasi sebetulnya yang saya coba analisis. Pertama dampaknya terhadap hukum, kedua dampaknya terhadap lingkungan. Itu dua hal yang menurut saya secara kajian akademis harus kita bedakan. Dalam kajian perspektif hukum, tentunya politik hukum sangat berpengaruh. Bahasa sederhana saya adalah suasana kebatinan pemerintah, di mana memang esensi penyusunan UUCK itu adalah politik pembangunan infrastruktur. Memang kalau dikaitkan dengan konsep yang tadi saya sampaikan, memang pro-nya akan pro ekonomi dibandingkan dengan pro terhadap lingkungan. Nah, jadi dalam suasana itu sebetulnya saya tanggapi dulu dari perspektif hukum. Nanti baru dampak terhadap hukum lingkungan. Dari perspektif hukum sebetulnya ada hal positif yang saya tangkap di sana, walaupun pertanyaan mendasarnya adalah apakah masyarakat kita siap atau tidak dengan konsep yang diusung oleh Omnibus Law, yang tadi dalam presentasi saya katakan sebagai trust. Beberapa mekanisme simplifikasi, perizinan dan sebagainya itu esensinya adalah memberikan kepercayaan yang lebih kepada masyarakat, di mana kalau kita sandingkan dengan negara-negara yang developed country, memang civil society itu menguat. Pemerintah percaya kepada masyarakatnya untuk taat terhadap hukum. Sedangkan pola yang kita anut sekarang adalah kepatuhan. Jadi dua terminologi yang cukup berbeda. Nah, kalau kita lihat dari implikasi terhadap lingkungan, memang ini yang saya katakan agak sedikit dikesampingkan oleh Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja ini, di mana sebelumnya kita mengenal banyaknya prinsip kehati-hatian dalam berbagai peraturan perundang-undangan, termasuk pertimbangan teknis. Itu mengakibatkan banyaknya proses perizinan cukup panjang. Nah, pengesampingan AMDAL, kemudian juga tata ruang, memang di satu sisi sangat disayangkan terkait dengan hal itu. Tapi apabila kita implementasikan secara penuh UUCK ini, memang pertanyaan mendasar yang saya sampaikan, apakah masyarakat kita siap untuk mengubah mindset yang tadinya kita patuh terhadap banyak aturan, menjadi taat kepada yang dinamakan standar, pedoman. Nah, itu pertanyaannya. Tapi terhadap lingkungan kita harus fair, itu memang agak sedikit kecolongan untuk itu. Nah, sehingga yang saya sampaikan sebelumnya adalah penguatan dalam proses penyusunan dokumen-dokumen sebagai dokumen pencegahan yang menjadi dominan. Tata ruang sebagai first door, public participation-nya cukup terlihat, tapi kelemahannya adalah sejauh mana masyarakat itu paham bahwa ini data tidak bisa dibaca oleh semua orang, kemudian informasi yang terkadang memang pendekatannya adalah welfare dan prosperity dibandingkan bahwa ini ada environmental impact. Itu Pak Mardhani, persepsi saya di satu sisi, tapi di sisi lain memang saya katakan pemerintah mencoba atau negara kita mencoba untuk bergerak dari developing country ke developed country dengan konsep yang diusung. Tapi beberapa bagian dari itu memang punya implikasi yang cukup besar, terutama aspek lingkungan seperti itu. Nah, itu Pak Mardhani ya, untuk keterbukaan mungkin Pak Andika, saya mungkin tidak terlalu familiar dengan isu itu Pak, mohon maaf sebelumnya, tapi mungkin nanti ada panelis yang lain bisa menanggapi. Terima kasih
Pak Maret.
Halo.
Silakan Pak, boleh langsung menanggapi sebelum Pak Ketut, mohon maaf Pak Ketut.
Ya, saya tunggu.
Diskusi ilmiah kan ini, bukan sikap politik ya, diskusi ilmiah ini. Pak Maret, sedikit kecolongan atau kecolongannya banyak? Ya, ini akademisi intelektual nggak boleh bohong loh. Saya terus terang aja, kalau bicara soal nafasnya Omnibus Law, kita tahu bersama bahwa semangat dasarnya ingin merapikan dan merampingkan regulasi yang dianggap tumpang tindih. Obesitas regulasi itu dibuat ramping sehingga kemudian pembangunan ini bisa berlari cepat, bisa akselerasi. Itu semangat dasarnya. Maka kata kuncinya adalah efisiensi, efektivitas, akselerasi. Tetapi kalau saya lihat, saya kebetulan dari Komisi 4. Pertanian, peternakan, perikanan, lingkungan hidup. Omnibus Law ini saya memahami sebagai upaya untuk memudahkan dunia usaha, untuk investasi, lewat Undang-Undang Cipta Kerja ini. Pertanyaan saya, sejauh mana perspektif green economy itu diadopsi dalam Undang-Undang Omnibus Law ini? Kalau di luar negeri, investasi itu mensyaratkan adanya penghormatan atau respek terhadap ekologi. Di sini kesannya ekologi itu, penghormatan terhadap green economy itu justru bertentangan dengan investasi. Proses politik sudah terjadi, Pak. Kira-kira akademisi dan masyarakat sipil itu ada kajian untuk melakukan judicial review atau tidak ya? Ya, saya ngomong terbuka-terbuka aja, Pak. Saya di Komisi 4 gelisah. Saya tadi udah minta izin pada ketua saya dari fraksi PDI Perjuangan. Terus terang, Pak. Saya kasih contoh hari ini di Taman Nasional Komodo, kebetulan saya dari NTT. Itu pariwisatanya tampaknya semakin kencang berbasis pada investasi, bukan lagi berbasis pada konservasi. Itu satu contoh kecil. Masih banyak contoh yang lain, Pak. Tadi menarik sekali Profesor Ketut ya, bicara soal diskursus. Ini Jürgen Habermas bicara soal itu. Dan menurut saya, public policy yang sehat memang harus didekati oleh kajian. Harus ada diskursus ilmiah di sana. Nah ini mohon maaf, ini tampaknya yang kita abai hari-hari ini, Pak. Makanya saya tanya tadi, ada nggak kira-kira akademisi, masyarakat sipil untuk melakukan judicial review? Karena dari tadi kita ngomong lingkungan hidup ini, kami di Komisi 4 sudah kaji lintas fraksi juga soal itu. Mungkin dari 100% itu tampaknya cuma 20% aja, Pak, yang sejalan dengan semangat global tentang bagaimana kita menjaga lingkungan hidup kita ini, Pak. Kita belum bicara pada aspek kelautan dan perikanan, hutan tadi, deforestasi. Kita belum bicara pada soal agriculture-nya, pertaniannya, dan lain-lain. Nah ini, ya mohon maaf, ini curhat sih sebenarnya. Bos, saya kembalikan. Itu aja yang mau saya sampaikan sebenarnya.
Ya, Terima kasih Pak atas pertanyaannya luar biasa. Mungkin sebelum dijawab oleh Pak Maret, kita ke Pak Ketut dulu ya, Bapak Ibu. Silakan Pak Ketut untuk menanggapi pertanyaan yang sebelumnya tadi.
Ya, suara saya bisa didengar?
Iya bisa Pak.
Ya, yang pertama Pak Mardani Rata, yang Pak Mardani, yang kedua dari Bapak siapa itu? Karena pakai masker.
Saya Ansilema Pak, PDI Perjuangan.
Ya, Ansilema PDI Perjuangan. Karena dua orang politisi sangat senior, ya pertanyaannya sangat politis ya, tapi sangat penting. Ya, Pak Mardani, saya sangat suka Bapak menanyakan hal yang sulit ini. Di manakah kita meletakkan demokrasi? Apakah demokrasi itu berarti menghamba kepada ekspertasi para ilmuwan, data-data ilmiah semua? Apakah demokrasi itu berarti menghamba kepada yang memiliki kekuatan, power, negara maupun partai politik dan yang lain-lain? Ataukah kita percaya bahwa demokrasi itu adalah wisdom of the crowd? Masyarakat publik luas yang tidak tahu menahu sedalam pakar dan seberkuasa tentang negara. Saya percaya yang tengah ini, Pak. Jadi demokrasi itu harus memberi ruang yang maksimal kepada wisdom of the crowd. Jadi orang kebanyakan, orang masyarakat kebanyakan untuk diberi ruang untuk memperdebatkan isu ini. Karena Bapak bertanya tadi, seberapa kita boleh lempar isu ini ke publik? Seberapa ini adalah isu yang sangat strategis untuk negara dan bangsa dan kepanjang. Saya setuju tadi ada kawan kita Andika atau siapa yang bilang bahwa kita harus mencoba memberi perdebatan ilmiah yang mewarnai diskursus publik, sehingga publik itu dapat informasi yang berbagai informasi dan itu sah. Nah, saya tidak percaya fully dengan authority itu hanya kepada ilmuwan, meskipun saya ilmuwan. Dan saya tidak percaya juga kepada negara fully karena dia punya otoritas dan power. Enggak, publik yang memiliki kedaulatan itu harus diberi ruang untuk mengerti dan berdebat dan memahami. Bahkan ikut membantu negara memutuskan hal-hal yang penting. Makanya saya mengusulkan tadi bini publik atau ini Pak, apa namanya? Apakah itu dianggap kebocoran atau segala macam? Coba kita buat mekanisme supaya itu tidak menjadi rahasia negara diperdebatkan di ranah publik atau apa gitu ya. Nah, saya kalau kita percaya demokrasi ya publik harus diajak terlibat dan seberapa publik boleh tahu itu tidak, ayo kita perdebatkan lebih lanjut. Nah, kemudian tadi Bapak Ansel ya dari PDIP menanyakan apakah undang-undang yang omnibus ini memangkas konseptualisasi kita secara filosofis tentang pariwisata misalnya. Apakah pariwisata kita hanya menjadi industri, kehilangan esensi ekologi dan kehilangan fondasi kulturalnya? Itu perdebatan yang menurut saya harus dilempar ke publik lebih jauh, Pak. Dan ketika ada kawan-kawan yang mengawal ke Mahkamah Konstitusi untuk mempertanyakan substansi maupun proses, menurut saya itu wilayah baru yang terbuka dan sah di negeri ini. Dan kalau Pulau Komodo sekarang bertanya isu ini, mungkin Pulau Bali akan setelah ini. Jadi ada isu sangat esensial. Apakah pariwisata kita hanya menjadi industri? Bagaimana dengan ekologi? Bagaimana dengan budaya? Nah, topik tentang legitimasi dari green growth ekonomi itu bicara tentang hal itu. Itu sangat sangat ya memang kita harus belajar bicara tentang hal-hal yang berat ini, meskipun mungkin menimbulkan kontroversi pada awalnya. Demikian.
Terima kasih Pak Ketut untuk jawabannya. Dan tadi pertanyaan, silakan Pak Maret bisa di.
Terima kasih yang terhormat Pak Prema terkait dengan pertanyaan Bapak tadi. Mungkin tadi saya sedikit malu-malu ya Pak menjawabnya. Karena memang begini Pak, pertama terkait dengan dampak UCK ini terhadap aspek lingkungan. aspek yang kecenderungan ke ekonomi sehingga berdampak implikasi cukup besar terhadap lingkungan. Kalau ditanyakan apakah ada semacam judicial review dari akademisi, cukup banyak pasca, sebelum bahkan setelahnya itu cukup banyak menginisiasi, tapi karena perdebatan itu digeser ke perdebatan material, Pak, terkait misalnya kalau kita dengar kemarin aspek tenaga kerjaan itu sudah terlebih dahulu mengajukan gugatan, saya berasumsi bahwa mereka sudah yakin substan apa yang akan di-challenge di sana. Nah, untuk aspek tata ruang dan lingkungan, sepanjang sepengetahuan saya, beberapa akademisi lintas perguruan tinggi itu sedang menyusun beberapa kajian terkait untuk judicial review hal ini. Hanya di satu sisi, Pak, ternyata para akademisi ini pun berusaha melindungi aspek lingkungan melalui peraturan pelaksana. Jadi karena objektivitas kita dianggap sebagai akademisi yang punya potensi objektif, kita punya komitmen bersama sepanjang judicial review itu punya proses yang cukup panjang. Beberapa rekan misalnya dengan ahli-ahli hukum lingkungan, tata ruang, itu cukup dilibatkan di penyusunan peraturan pelaksana. Kita challenge di sana. Kita challenge setidak-tidaknya kalau waktu ini panjang, kita bisa menitipkan aspek-aspek yang kecenderungannya untuk perlindungan lingkungan di aturan di bawahnya. Itu yang selama ini pasca dan sebelum UCK ini diundangkan, ini yang kebanyakan kita lakukan. Nah, terkait hal yang ini juga kalau boleh saya gambarkan dari perspektif aspek tata ruang, yang sedikit menyedihkan adalah dokumen ini sebetulnya dokumen yang cukup powerful, tapi satu pasal dalam UCK ini membuat dokumen ini menjadi tidak punya pemaknaan sepanjang ada yang namanya proyek strategis nasional. Bahkan by implementasi, proyek strategis nasional ini kan secara legalitas harus dalam bentuk peraturan presiden. Tapi ada beberapa dalam praktek bahwa menitipkan proyek-proyek yang sifatnya non strategis dikemas dalam konsepsi PSN. Nah, tata ruang selama ini bergerak sebagai penyeimbang untuk mengatakan bahwa oke, kawasan ini akan dialihfungsikan, tapi tolong KLHS-nya. Nah, ini mungkin saya sampaikan Bapak Ibu, dalam beberapa proses konsultasi publik kaitan dengan KLHS, kelemahan terbesar dari sektor lingkungan adalah ketidakmampuan mereka untuk menerjemahkan KLHS untuk mengatakan it's okay dialihfungsikan, ini tidak boleh. Kalau ingin bikin infrastruktur silahkan belok atau pindah. KLHS itu sebetulnya punya power sebesar itu, tapi isu dana, isu kemampuan, sumber daya itu menjadi kelemahan terbesar, di mana pada akhirnya penyusunan rencana tata ruang itu, tim KLHS itu ada tim yang sama dengan tim penyusun rencana. Jadi mereka akan menjustifikasi sebetulnya. Nah, jadi dua strategi sebetulnya terkait dengan adaptasi UCK yang secara fakta kita nyatakan dia politik pembangunan infrastruktur, pasti pro ekonomi. Semua proses yang menghambat pasti akan digeser untuk kepentingan itu. Tapi kami di akademisi selain melakukan proses secara formal, tentu sambil menunggu itu kita mencoba memasukkan beberapa isu, termasuk beberapa tulisan-tulisan yang mungkin akan menjadi landasan kebijakan setidak-tidaknya eksekutif. Mungkin seperti Pak pendapat saya. Terima kasih.
Baik, terima kasih. Kita berikan applause karena waktu juga sudah melewati batas yang seharusnya. Mungkin diskusi ini kita cukupkan sekian dengan saya highlight sedikit dari hasil diskusi tadi, bahwa kita harus berkaca kepada Korea pasca krisis ya, post disaster recovery yang tadi disampaikan oleh Pak Andika, bahwa investasi pada green recovery itu sangat menguntungkan di depan di kemudian hari, dan dia lebih long term untuk dilakukan investasinya. Lalu untuk penghitungan juga beda metode, juga terjadi perbedaan angka, banyak saintis yang akan involve di dalamnya. Dan untuk dampak-dampak perspektif dari hukum, ada Pak Mart menyatakan bahwa Omnibus Law ini perpindahan dari ketaatan ke kepatuhan, dari kepatuhan ke ketaatan, jadi memang harus ketaatan dari publik atau masyarakat itu sangat diperlukan dalam Omnibus Law, penerapan Omnibus Law ini. Tadi juga ada pertanyaan terakhir, jawaban dari Pak Ketut juga tadi ada, saya highlight, demokrasi ini harus memberi ruang kepada masyarakat, khususnya untuk partisipasi masyarakat di bidang environmental ini. memang seharusnya ada konsultasi publik dan lain sebagainya. Yang terakhir mungkin tadi pernyataan dari Pak Maret bahwa ada beberapa sikap dari akademisi yang terkait dengan Omnibus Law ini mungkin dalam rangka public participation-nya kita menunggu peraturan pelaksana Omnibus Law ini dan juga dilakukan konsultasi publik yang lebih terbuka berkaitan dengan yang tadi di sesi awal dijelaskan mengenai pembukaan data dan informasi. Baik, terima kasih banyak atas diskusi yang sangat menarik hari ini. Mudah-mudahan hasil diskusi ini dapat bermanfaat bagi kita semua, khususnya kontribusi untuk green growth yang diterapkan di Indonesia ini. Terima kasih, saya kembalikan kepada Ibu Enda. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih Bapak, Ibu dan hadirin sekalian. Thank you for your patience and thank you for the lively discussion. We have heard all the speakers and experts presented their views, and I hope they can provide the audience useful and thoughtful insights on the importance and different aspects of participation and public participation and transparency in green growth and in environment and in general. To close, I would like to invite Chair of the Task Force to give the closing remarks. Silakan Pak Charles.
Thank you, Ibu Enda. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our fruitful discussion. I hope everyone can get useful insights and knowledge from our discussion today. I would like to thank Ambassador Hedges, who have joined us virtually for the opening remarks, Rafael Jimenez Aibar from WFD, Petrarca Careci from UN Pulse Lab, Dr. Nadia from the Faculty of Law of Padjadjaran University. Indeed, transparency and openness could improve public services, build trust in government, and promote sustainable growth as well as in meeting the commitments of climate change. It is therefore important to make data accessible to the public. Public participation encourages citizens to be more engaged in the decision-making process that have an impact on their local community. In terms of green economy policymaking and implementation, the purpose of public participation is to promote transparency, encourage openness in government, and to build ownership of development decisions as well as programs and projects. Therefore, this would further enhance the legitimacy of the government's green growth policies through substantive and inclusive public participation. I hope that through our discussions today, we can gain understanding on the importance of public participation and are able to access information in a legislative process as well as in the decision-making process. Furthermore, it is through discussions, dialogues, and open exchange of ideas we can strengthen our democracy and public participation. Thank you.
Terima kasih Pak Charles. Sebelum menutup, mungkin saya ingin mengundang adik-adik mahasiswa yang join di sini dan juga yang mengikuti secara online di YouTube untuk mengunjungi website Bksap yang kami beri nama Jelajah Diplomasi Parlemen Indonesia, dan juga follow sosial media Bksap karena kami mempunyai banyak events yang melibatkan adik-adik mahasiswa. Atas nama sekretariat kami mohon maaf atas lebih dan kurangnya dari penyelenggaraan ini. Terima kasih sekali lagi atas partisipasi Bapak Ibu anggota dan hadirin sekalian. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.